realm governed by divine decrees, a young boy's destiny was about to be altered forever. At the sacred altar, the head priestess began the formal ceremony to reveal young Lord Rei's official status, expecting a routine blessing. However, as the divine glow of goddess Aster illuminated the ritual chamber, the deity bestowed a far darker decree upon him, the title of the one afflicted by hardship, promising a lifetime of relentless trials. As the priestess read the horrified inscription aloud, Rei gasped in sheer, utter disbelief. Outraged by this divine misfortune, he internally cursed the deity who had saddled him with such a miserable fate before he could even properly walk. Rewinding a few hours earlier, a lavish carriage had rolled through the countryside, carrying his eager parents toward the sacred temple. Lord Zeke and Lady Eris had held hands affectionately, brimming with pride and curiosity about what latent talents their cherished son would display upon reaching his first milestone. Inside the swaying carriage, his mother and father continued to exchange affectionate words, eagerly anticipating the divine reveal of their child's potential. Meanwhile, back at the estate, his devoted cat-eared maid Chloe had held him close while gleefully celebrating his upcoming status appraisal. He reflected on the rules of this world, where a noble child underwent their temple appraisal upon turning 1 year old, right after learning to speak, because he had recently uttered his first words during speech practice with Chloe and his parents. His family had immediately set the date for his official trip to the temple. His parents and maid excitedly planned a grand celebratory feast for the evening. He felt the suffocating weight of their massive expectations pressing down on his shoulders. To prepare him for the ceremony, Chloe had brought up her own status window as a visual demonstration, revealing her impressive level 34 stats and explaining how attributes, titles, and skills were displayed on the translucent screen. Realizing that an average adult possessed stats around 100, while his maid boasted remarkably high combat numbers, he quietly resolved to keep a low profile, knowing that legendary heroes were the only ones expected to reach level 100. Parents had then elaborated on the skill system, clarifying that over 500 skills existed and that reaching level 7 in any discipline made a person a world-renowned master. To illustrate this, his father had proudly summoned both his own and Lady Eris's status windows, boasting about her master-level thunder magic and his own high-ranking spear techniques. Glancing over their extraordinary combat statistics, he felt an acute sting of embarrassment regarding his own utterly average attributes. However, his attention was suddenly caught by a peculiar entry on his father's profile, leading him to innocently read aloud the title Harem Maker in front of his mother. The status system's detailed description defined the title as someone who had simultaneously dated 10 or more partners. Lady Eris's expression turned terrifyingly dark as she glared at her nervous husband. With an ominous grin and a trembling aura of fury, his mother gently placed a hand on his head, demanding a strict promise that he would never grow up to acquire such disgraceful titles. Pondered his father's colorful past while riding past the town in a horse-drawn carriage. Later that day, they arrived at the local church, where the priest stood ready to begin the formal status acquisition ceremony. The priest raised his hands to pray for Goddess Aster's blessing upon the young boy. The actual titles granted to him began to materialize. Looking at his status display in shock, the boy noted that while his base attributes were entirely average, the titles bestowed upon him were extraordinary. He reasoned that having no growth cap paired with the goddess's blessing was essentially an ideal cheat ability, though his optimism was about to be short-lived. To his horror, he discovered another title called One Afflicted by Hardship, guaranteeing a life full of severe trials in exchange for dramatic stat increases, confirming his life was set to hard mode at just 1 year old. Anticipating life-threatening danger ahead, he resolved that his only option was to endure rigorous training under his highly capable parents. His decision made, he approached his mother and father, stating firmly that he had something crucial to discuss with them. Parents stared in shock, bewildered by his sudden ability to speak in full, fluent sentences. Looking them directly in the eyes, the young boy calmly revealed that he was a reincarnated soul who retained all memories of his former life. Before they could respond, his consciousness suddenly drifted away into a dark, watery void. Awakening in an unfamiliar realm, he sat up in confusion just as a gentle voice addressed him by his past life's name, Hayato Katsuragi. He found himself face to face with a breathtaking goddess, whose composure instantly melted into delighted flattery at his silent admiration. She began rambling rapidly about how uncommon it was for her to receive compliments compared to other gorgeous deities. He inwardly questioned her eccentric behavior. She immediately read his mind and voiced her indignation, leaving him completely flabbergasted. He listened in astonishment as the figure introduced herself as Aster, the goddess of reincarnation. She confirmed that she had indeed read his mind, casually recalling how he had perished instantly as Hayato Katsuragi after pushing a woman out of the path of an oncoming car. Accepting the grim reality of his demise, he quietly absorbed her explanation. Only his soul had survived the impact, transported directly into her divine domain. Deity playfully brushed aside his concerns, chatting nonchalantly about how souls eventually adjust to the situation. Her carefree demeanor began to grate on his nerves as she announced that his soul was ready to be sent into a new world. He probed about his capabilities in this second life. She casually revealed that his potential was thoroughly average, leaving him underwhelmed by the news. Before he could object to being rushed, she abruptly announced that time was up, granting him a gift where continuous effort would yield growth. She cheerfully wished him good luck and sent him away mid-protest. Thus, he was born into a new noble household as Revolt Runwalker. As his parents looked back on that memory, they realized that his unlimited potential title originated from the goddess's parting gift. Though the curse-like title brought unexpected complications, the boy understood that facing trials was essential to acquiring the strength required for the future. Determined not to suffer an early death a second time, he resolved to leverage both his divine blessings and the complete backing of his mother and father. Having shared the full truth of his reincarnation, he stood silently before his family, nervously awaiting their verdict. Instead of rejection, his mother wrapped her arms around him in a warm embrace, recognizing how burdensome it must have been to carry memories of a past life all on his own. Looking gently into his eyes, she assured him that his origin held nothing troubling or unsettling for them. Holding him tight, she declared that his past life mattered little, affirming that he was, above all else, their precious child, Revolt Runwalker. His father placed a comforting hand on his head, promising that they would never let him go regardless of his choices, while Philia enthusiastically pledged her lifelong loyalty. Surrounded by unconditional love and complete acceptance, the young boy felt the heavy burden on his soul melt away entirely. With tears of gratitude, he thanked them from the bottom of his heart, prompting his parents to eagerly agree that the time had come to begin his rigorous training. 7 years had passed since that fateful day. He found himself amidst an intense martial exchange, barely catching his footing as his opponent warned him never to drop his guard during training. Swift, decisive strikes, his partner drove him back, effortlessly parrying his defensive maneuvers and striking a decisive blow. Rubbing his sore head, the young boy acknowledged the sharp pain as his half-sister, Ares Runwalker, bluntly reminded him that a real steel blade would have ended his life. He offered a weak apology, while Ares lectured him on anticipating enemy tactics and reading structural movements before reacting. Stately voice interjected to calm the tense sparring match as Eileen Runwalker, Ares' mother, stepped forward to intervene with a warm smile. Ares flushed with embarrassment as her mother gently teased her about her own clumsy wild boar charges during her younger training days. Reflecting on his continuous growth over 8 years, Revolt examined his remarkably balanced statistics, shaped by rigorous weapons training and his unconstrained mastery over multiple elements of magic. When Ares snapped him out of his inner thoughts, Ray admitted he had been contemplating how to finally secure a victory against her after losing every single match. She playfully dismissed his ambition, attributing her dominance to raw talent and the formidable titles she had earned as a prodigy of both blade and speed. Her words were no empty boast, as she had famously torn through full ranks of armored frontier soldiers like a storm during military exercises. Watching her, Ray recalled the complex structure of his noble family, headed by Lord Zeke and his 3 wives. His own mother, Erislit, was the first wife, followed by the second wife Elizabeth and third wife Eileen, a former knight who had fallen in love with Zeke after a duel. Eileen's demeanor shifted to quiet gravity as she pointed toward a distant mountain range and questioned Ray about his knowledge of the peak. He met her gaze steadily, confirming that he knew of the location she mentioned. Nodding in approval, she motioned for him to join her inside the estate to begin their serious consultation. He listened attentively as his instructor pointed out the tactical reality on the wall map, explaining that the Runwalker family's territory bordered a hostile neighboring country, serving as the frontline buffer zone in any potential war. Told that the territory maintained a standing army of 10,000 soldiers, the young noble questioned whether such numbers were truly sufficient to secure the border. The explanation followed that the royal capital's nobility feared rebellion and desired stability above all else, intentionally capping regional army sizes despite the strategic vulnerability it created. Looking out toward the looming peaks, the conversation turned to the cursed land beyond, a region teeming with dangerous beasts and high-level monsters. Worse still was the looming threat of the Great Monster March, a catastrophic phenomenon that recurred roughly every decade. Whenever the horde descended from the Cursed Mountains, the local forces were forced into devastating battles simply to stem the tide. Because of this, defending the territory was vital. If this land fell, the entire kingdom would face immediate crisis. Eileen solemnly reminded him that 10 years had already passed since the last march, warning that a new assault could begin at any moment, and that as a Runwalker, he had to be ready. Reflecting on his 7 years of peaceful training, Ray realized that the quiet days were coming to an end and the foretold hardship was drawing near. Suddenly, his solemn thoughts were shattered when young Philia and Clona pounced on him, cheerfully demanding his attention and affection. Two energetic little girls were his younger beast person's sister Philia and Chloe's daughter Clona, both born 3 years after him. Aries teased him about his popularity as the two toddlers squabbled over who got to be petted first. Watching the lively scene unfold, Chloe and Eileen looked on with fond expressions. The adults teasingly suggested he could court Clona in the future. Ray flusteredly protested that he had no interest in courting 5-year-olds. Aries playfully scolded him, while Eileen looked at her son with a deadpan stare, quietly wondering if he had inherited his father's harem-building tendencies. He belonged to a family that offered nothing but warmth, where the young boy spent 7 peaceful years surrounded by loving sisters and devoted guidance. He secretly wished that these serene days of affection and light-hearted training would last forever, but his quiet happiness was instantly shattered by the frantic tolling of the estate's warning bell. As the loud chimes echoed across the courtyard, panic rippled through everyone present, from the startled children covering their ears to the adult warriors who instantly recognized the dire alarm. Deep within the surrounding forests, a terrifying horde of monstrous beasts began their march, marking the arrival of the first true crisis in the young boys. Sharp, ringing chime echoed across the quiet countryside, shattering the peaceful atmosphere as everyone halted in place. As the alarm continued to reverberate through the air, the group stood silently together, looking out toward the distant horizon. Curious and uneasy, the young girl asked Eileen why the bell was ringing, prompting the lady warrior to turn toward her with a serious gaze. Eileen solemnly explained that the bell signals the approach of the Great March, warning that advanced scouts have likely spotted a massive army of monsters emerging from the cursed land. While the children gasped in disbelief, the head maid offered gentle comfort to keep them calm. Moments later, Lord Zeke approached the group with an urgent, resolute stride, calling out to everyone present. He confirmed that they had all heard the warning bell, and the women nodded solemnly, realizing the gravity of the impending crisis. Revealed scout reports indicating an incoming force of roughly 10,000 monsters, spearheaded by swarms of lower-level creatures, but anchored by a massive horde of orcs. Adding to the dread, Eileen pointed out that this threat consisted of high-ranking threats, command structures including orc generals, orc magicians, and even an orc king. The young ones asked about monster rankings. Eris clarified that beasts are categorized from rank E to rank S, making an A-rank lead army with B-rank generals uniquely hazardous. Processing this harrowing information, the boy realized the true scale of what they faced. 10,000 beasts led by an A-rank disaster, the infamous Great Monster March. Zeke quickly issued orders for Eris and Eileen to prepare defenses at the main gate, while placing the mansion's safety on Chloe and ordering the children to stay inside. However, Ares immediately protested, insisting she could fight alongside them. He met her outburst with stern authority, explaining that talent alone cannot compensate for a lack of real battlefield experience, where a single moment of hesitation means death. Confronted by her father's unyielding logic, the young girl was struck silent, unable to offer a counterargument. Softening his posture, he placed a gentle hand upon her head and warmly confessed that above all strategic reasons, he simply could not endure losing her. After receiving his soft reassurance, the young girl finally acquiesced, promising to remain safely behind as her brother watched on. She agreed to return to the safety of the mansion alongside her brother, following their father's strict instructions to fall back. Before they parted, Lord Zeke reiterated his warning, insisting that although defeat was unthinkable, they must escape with everyone should the front lines crumble. Reassurance filled the air as the young ones made their way across the courtyard, watched closely by the attentive household staff. Once inside, Ares checked on her brother, inquiring whether he had brought along his designated weapon for defense. Adjusting the blade strapped to his side, he quietly hoped that circumstances would never force him to draw it while their parents fought at the perimeter. Suddenly, a bright glimmer caught their attention from the window, revealing a massive magic formation unfolding in the distance. Meanwhile, up on the defensive ramparts, Lord Zeke arrived at the command post to meet Captain Gilbert. Observing the field below, Gilbert pointed out an unsettling anomaly. Rather than charging recklessly as usual, the beasts were marching in organized military formation. Across the open plains, rows of monstrous soldiers moved forward with terrifying discipline and calm composure. Having survived 2 previous invasions, Zeke concurred that this unnatural strategy signaled a far greater threat than standard monster swarms. Refusing to allow the enemy time to coordinate, the commander ordered an immediate preemptive strike to break their momentum. Taking her place at the vanguard, Eileen concentrated her spiritual energy and began chanting an incantation of thunder. The deafening roar, a catastrophic bolt of lightning descended from the heavens, incinerating the front ranks of the vanguard. Commending her devastating spell work, Zeke directed her to clear the rear forces while he prepared to confront the high-ranking orcs. Steel met claw as the garrison clashed directly with the monstrous horde in a chaotic struggle for the realm's survival. He smirked with supreme confidence, watching the imposing silhouette loom ahead and assuming this clash would be settled in a matter of moments. Standing tall before the massive, heavily armed Orc King, the noble leader readied his blade without a hint of fear. With a fierce grin, he declared his intent to butcher the monstrous beast right where it stood. Unmoved by the provocation, the colossal warlord narrowed its glowing eyes in cold, calculated silence. Sinister, knowing grin slowly spread across the monster's jagged tusks. Catching sight of that unsettling smile, the lord suddenly paused, unsettled by why the giant beast seemed so amused and why it had advanced in a battle entirely alone. Before he could process the anomaly, a radiant magic circle erupted in the distance, followed immediately by chaotic shouts warning of an unexpected emergency within the territory. Panic rippled through the ranks as messengers confirmed that nearly 100 orcs had materialized straight inside the town walls. Or still, formidable B-rank orc generals led the assault group, marching menacingly through the newly opened breach. Back inside the safe walls of the mansion, the young siblings stared out the window at the distant magical light in confusion. Looking down into the streets below, the young girl gasped in horror as she spotted a full legion of monsters ravaging the inner city. Sharp mind immediately began working, questioning the suspicious timing of an internal raid occurring simultaneously with the frontline battle. Turning to his sister and the attending maids, he pieced together the horrifying reality that all their strongest warriors were currently occupied far outside the gates. Boldly announced his conclusion. The massive army marching outside was merely a brilliant decoy, and the teleported strike force in the town was the true main strike. Detailing the enemy's tactical mastermind, he explained that the invaders had deliberately waited for the elite forces to deploy, leaving only a small guard force remaining to protect the helpless civilians. He stood analyzing the grim reality as the horror of the situation set in. Orcs were notorious for low intelligence, making a strategic ambush of this scale utterly bewildering. If left unchecked, the town would fall in moments. Refusing to let disaster strike, Ares shouted that she would not allow it to happen and bolted toward the danger alone. Recognizing the immediate peril of her reckless charge, he moved instinctively to shield the younger girls while calling out to stop her. Turning his focus back to those right beside him, he gently wrapped his arms around the trembling girls, offering a quiet moment of warmth amidst the chaos. Looking into their tearful eyes with a reassuring smile, he promised to protect them and everyone else, soothing their fears until they nodded back in relief. Patting their heads, he entrusted their safety to Chloe before turning away, even as Philia pleaded with him not to do anything reckless. Reaching down with calm resolve, he gripped the hilt of his weapon, readying himself to step onto the battlefield. Hoisting his weapon effortlessly onto his shoulder, a confident grin broke across his face as he reminded himself that he had the watchful eye of a goddess on his bronze sword in hand. Ares rushed through the stone-paved streets of the town as smoke rose ahead, charging straight toward the chaos. Surrounding her were the ruined remains of crushed wooden structures and debris, underscoring the absolute destruction wrought upon the village. Witnessing the brutal sight of villagers cornered by monstrous beasts, she let out a furious cry and lunged forward to strike. Draw the hulking orcs away from the helpless townspeople, she shouted at the top of her lungs, goading the monsters into turning their full focus toward her. Massive beasts turned with deafening roars, fixing their hostile glares on the young swordswoman who stood ready to face them. Darting between the heavy blows of her opponents, she struck rapidly, reminding herself to stay mobile at all costs to prevent being surrounded. As more creatures swarmed into the alleyway, she realized the endless waves would soon overwhelm her unless she thinned their ranks and secured a path for evacuation. Suddenly, a towering, heavily armed orc leader stepped out to block her path, its sheer size dwarfing every beast she had faced so far. Staring up at the colossal figure, her breath hitched in sudden panic as she felt the overwhelming aura of danger radiating from it. The hooded monster glared down at her with cold, merciless eyes, silently exuding the raw strength of a true warrior. Desperate to survive, she cast body reinforcement magic just as the giant pulled a massive blade from its back with a furious roar. Leader's single, crushing swing easily shattered her defensive guard, blowing her back through the air and crashing violently onto the hard stone. Battered and struggling to breathe, memory fragments of her past lessons flashed in her mind, warning her that talent meant nothing without real battle experience. Slumped against the ground in defeat, she was forced to admit the painful truth. Her father had been right all along, and she stood no chance against such terrifying power. She lay slumped against the stone debris, whispering a desperate apology to her father as the hulking enemy towered above her. Just as the fatal blow was about to land, a familiar voice echoed across the courtyard, calling out Ares' name. Leaping dynamically off the high stone wall, Ray plunged into the fray, his unexpected arrival drawing her wide-eyed gaze in shock and relief. With perfect timing, he positioned his heavy shield directly between his sister and the monster's crushing club, deflecting the blow with incredible impact before swift, evasive maneuvers created distance. Breathing a heavy sigh of relief, he hoisted his staff and stood guard over her, remarking on how close that call had been. Stunned into absolute silence, she could only stare up at her younger brother in disbelief, barely able to utter his name. Apologizing for his late arrival, he checked on her condition to ensure she was still holding up. Inspecting her injuries, he noticed the cuts on her arm and head, wondering aloud why she was pressing herself so far beyond her limits. Overwhelmed with worry and exasperation, she turned to him and demanded to know why he had come to such a dangerous place. She frantically reminded him that he lost to her in every mock fight, stressing that an orc general was far beyond anything he could face, while he sheepishly tried to explain his logic. Dismissing his previous strike as a mere sneak attack, she insisted that he get out of danger immediately while she tried to blast the enemy away. Looking at her battered state, he questioned her plan, watching as she stubbornly claimed she could still draw the monster's attention despite her heavy injuries. Reaching out firmly, he squished her cheeks together to cut off her stubborn protest, turning her dramatic speech into muffled nonsense. Placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder, he He called her idea ridiculous and asked how he could ever leave his precious sister behind. Her eyes welled with emotional tears at his unwavering resolve, completely moved by his protective words. She attempts to protest, insisting on taking over the fight, but he firmly cuts her off, instructing her to rest and leave the battle to him. Reluctantly, she watches as he prepares a dangerous spell, grimly noting that it consumes immense mana and temporarily immobilizes his body. Steady confidence, he turns back to her with a determined smile, urging her to watch closely as he demonstrates how he truly fights. Activating dual enhancement magic simultaneously, he applies full output to boost both his physical capabilities and his weapon. Surpassing ordinary limits where mages only cast one spell at a time, he stacks speed and lightning enchantments in rapid succession. Realizing the truth behind his ability, she recognizes that his Genius Mage title allows him to execute multiple spells at once with reduced mana consumption. Calling his earlier experiments, he reflects on how combining self-buffs creates a devastating multiplier effect across all attributes. Examining his combat parameters, he notes with satisfaction that his active enhancements have more than doubled his base combat statistics. Acknowledging his current mana limitations, he braces himself, confident that this level of power will at least let him mount a decent fight. Dashing into the fray, he engages the vanguard, realizing with annoyance that the main orc leader is using lesser minions as living shields. Weaving fluidly through the battlefield, he executes precise spear strikes to dismantle the surrounding orc minion lines. The powerful, decisive strike, he sends the last remaining minion crashing down, isolating the orc leader for the final confrontation. Clashing directly with a massive leader, he strikes hard, but finds its thick hide nearly impervious to fatal damage. Catching his breath, he assesses his rapidly draining stamina and mana reserves, realizing he cannot sustain multiple enchantments for long. Standing his ground, he finds himself heavily surrounded as reinforcement orcs close in around him from all sides. He watches in alarm as the scattered orcs begin to regroup, realizing instantly that the battle is far from over. Grasping his weapon tightly, he contemplates using a desperate technique, fully aware that executing it will leave him completely immobilized and defenseless immediately after. Uncertainty briefly grips him as Ares calls out his name in deep concern. Looking over at her vulnerable figure, his hesitation vanishes, replaced by a sudden wave of fierce resolve as he chides himself for hesitating when lives are on the line. Channeling every drop of his remaining stamina and mana, he invokes his lightning enchantment directly into his weapon, resolved to push beyond his physical limits and finish the fight in a single ultimate strike. Crackling energy surged around the spear as the young warrior landed firmly, holding his weapon at the ready. Below him, his sister watched in awe alongside the formidable enemy leader, both stunned by the sudden surge of power. The towering opponent recoiled, marveling at the incredible concentration of magical force gathering before his eyes. Knowing the sheer volume of lightning magic which shattered the enchanted shaft, he resolved that he had no other choice. The fierce yell, he surged forward, convinced that this all-out strike was their only path to victory, while the monsters braced themselves. He unleashed the devastating Takamikazuchi, the lightning annihilation spear, cleaving straight through the air between the massive foes. Explosive release of elemental force blew the gigantic beasts backward, sending a shockwave that forced the young girl to shield her eyes. Blinding flash of pure lightning illuminated the entire battlefield in an instant. Far off by the fortress walls, the noble lord and his companions turned in astonishment toward the brilliant light flaring in the distance. As the smoke began to clear, the young girl coughed lightly, peering through the haze to see what remained. Giant warrior stood smoking and heavily scorched, yet he remained upright directly in front of the boy holding his now depleted weapon. Unable to withstand the extreme pressure, the enchanted spear crumbled into broken pieces upon the dirt. He looked back in sudden shock as he realized his weapon was destroyed. Despite taking the full brunt of the magical assault, the enemy commander took a heavy, deliberate step forward. He loomed over the young hero, advancing with ominous, echoing strides. Terrified that the monster could still move after suffering such devastating damage, the young girl screamed for him to run. She called out his name in sheer panic, her voice laced with desperate fear for his survival. Unsteady on its feet, the massive creature staggered for a brief moment before finally collapsing. The deafening crash, the monstrous foe hit the dirt, completely vanquished. Sensing that the danger had passed, he turned toward his sister with a gentle glance. Offering a relieved, playful smile, he asked if their victory was finally assured. Overwhelmed by emotion and immense relief, tearful gratitude washed across her face. She sprinted forward across the stone pathway without a moment's hesitation. Leaping into his arms, she sobbed, reprimanding him for making her worry so desperately, while he inwardly admitted he was utterly drained of magic power. Voices echoed from down the alley as reinforcements rushed toward the pair. Flanked by heavily armored guards, their mother arrived, frantically checking on their safety. Seeing her approach brought immense relief, but the extreme exertion caught up with him, causing his soul to figuratively slip away as he fainted into her arms. Desperate shouts filled the courtyard as the first major trial of his new life came to a dramatic close. Meanwhile, perched high atop the outer walls, a hooded figure observed the scene quietly before clicking his tongue in annoyance. Turning away from the courtyard, the shadowy observer walked into a brightly lit hall. Approaching a heavy wooden door, he knocked twice, prompting a stern voice from inside to grant him entry. He slipped quietly into the dimly lit council chamber, excusing his sudden intrusion. Inside, a gathering of shadowy figures sat around a long table, all eyes turning toward the high throne at the head of the room. Council members acknowledged his return and pressed for news, but he delivered grim tidings. Their meticulously laid plan had ended in total failure. Outrage immediately erupted among the gathered nobles, who furiously reminded him of the months spent embedding spies and preparing for the Grand March, as he had personally guaranteed success. Underneath his hood, his jaw clenched as the leader shouted at him, furious that an operation right beneath the kingdom's nose had been written off with a simple excuse. He harbored bitter resentment, reflecting on how they had all eagerly accepted his proposal and left him to do the hard labor, only to scapegoat him the instant things went wrong. Zagar demanded to know what punishment he should suffer. A majestic voice belonging to their supreme ruler cut through the room, commanding silence. Serene, crown-wearing emperor instructed everyone to await his word, promising that judgment would be passed in due time. Yet the hooded operative could not shake his frustration, recalling how a single young boy had effortlessly cut through dozens of orcs and felled an entire army to ruin their grand scheme. Young boy's fierce determination and absurdly powerful magic defied all logic for someone of his age. Walking away into the shadows, the operative concluded that if they were ever to claim the kingdom's territory, that dangerous child would have to be eliminated. Quiet sunlight filtered through the grand estate windows, where the young boy lay motionless under soft blankets in his bedroom. His large, bright eyes slowly fluttered open as consciousness returned to him. He blinked at the unfamiliar ceiling, trying to orient himself in the peaceful stillness. Memories of the intense battle rushed back to him, recalling his desperate fight against the formidable orc and wondering what transpired afterward. Beside his bed, two young girls were curled up together on the soft carpet, fast asleep. He recalled fond moments of their affectionate chatter and how deeply they cared for him. Looking down from his pillow, he recognized the beast-person child Philia along with her mother. Beside his mattress rested his half-sister Ares, who had fallen asleep sitting up while holding tightly onto his hand, her palm offering gentle warmth. Flustered by the sudden surge of affection, he quickly shook his head to clear his wandering thoughts, reminding himself of their shared bloodline. Just then, a knock sounded at the door as Chloe pushed it open and quietly entered the room. Upon seeing him sitting up, the headmaid announced his awakening at full volume, startling him as the sudden noise stirred the sleeping girls. Rubbing the sleep from their eyes, Philia and Ares gasped in disbelief as they looked toward the bed. Overjoyed, both girls bounded to their feet, eagerly competing for his attention and demanding warm affection. Grabbing his shoulders with tearful excitement, Ares scolded him for making everyone worry throughout his 2-day slumber. Shocked to hear he had been unconscious for so long, he listened as Chloe clarified that the doctor attributed his collapse to extreme magical exhaustion. He realized the true cause behind the rapid turn of events. turning his attention to his sister to inquire about her condition, only to be reassured that recovery magic had already healed her completely. The details of the aftermath came to light. How Lady Eileen had carried him back while warning bells signaled the historic, swift end to the Monster March. The door opened to reveal his father and mother arriving to check if he had awakened. Dressing his parents with deep respect, he apologized for causing them so much worry, prompting his father and mother to step closer and gently ask if he was feeling better. While praising his remarkable deed as domain ruler for saving their people, his father balanced the commendation with a stern paternal reminder, admitting he fought the urge to simply pat him on the back after such recklessness. Taking over the conversation, his mother leaned in close to warn him gravely about the extreme dangers of total magic depletion, stressing that pushing himself any further could have cost him his life, to which he promised to be far more careful. Turning her stern gaze to Ares as well, the noble mother reminded both children of how close they came to severe, irreversible harm, leading his sister to bow her head in quiet apology. Strict tone softened into warmth as she drew both children near, assuring them that despite the danger, they had fought magnificently and remained her absolute greatest pride. Looked up at her with bright, emotional eyes, softly calling out to his mother as her heartfelt words deeply touched his spirit. Observing the emotional reunion, his father and mother exchanged knowing smiles, acknowledging that despite carrying the heavy burden of noble lineage, their children were still young and deserved the freedom to simply be kids. Shifting the mood back to official matters, his father requested that young Philia and Chloe step outside for a short while so they could discuss critical details regarding the recent incident. Before departing, his sister and the young cat girl pleaded to spend more time together, earning a warm promise from him that they would soon go shopping in town and play to their heart's content. Lively young girls held him strictly to his word, demanding absolute certainty that he would not break his promise, to which he willingly agreed with a nod. Just as the room cleared, a disciplined knight commander entered to offer his formal apologies for the delay, greeted instantly by warm cries of Papa from Chloe and little Philia. Surprised by the unexpected arrival, he turned his attention toward the knight, who inquired after his well-being while taking in the domestic sight of his own family. It became clear that the steadfast knight captain was indeed Chloe's husband and Philia's father, having been delayed only because he was tasked with managing the heavy aftermath of the Great Monster March. He opened a meeting by thanking everyone present for their tireless efforts during the Great Monster March, calling for the briefing to officially begin. Lord detailed the army structure, noting how the forces had been organized into close-range units under Eileen and Mars, long-range units under Mel and Kay, and the magician unit led by Aeroslit and May Jane. Because each leader commanded their respective division with precision, casualties across the entire force were kept to an absolute minimum. Turning his attention to the young ones, he praised Ares and Ray for personally annihilating the invading orcs, which prevented widespread destruction in the town. Leaning down to acknowledge their bravery directly, Lord Zeke commended their heroic stand, observing that this march had recorded the fewest total monsters, under 10,000, mostly composed of orcs, though their interventions saved countless lives. Reflecting on past events, the leaders discussed how horde compositions seemed tied to their commanders. An orc king led the current strike, whereas previous incursions featured a dragon or an undead horde led by a lich. Gilbert concurred with the theory, emphasizing that this march behaved fundamentally differently from previous ones, an anomaly everyone in the room had noticed. Pointed out that the enemy had executed a tactical surprise attack, something they had never attempted before, by manifesting a massive magic circle in the sky right inside the town. This revelation shocked the group, as activating a spatial teleportation magic circle of that magnitude was unheard of among ordinary monsters. Grim truth became clear to everyone present. Humans were almost certainly involved, sabotaging their defense efforts while people risked their lives against the horde. Calculating the immense mana required to teleport nearly 100 orcs, they realized the spell demanded an extraordinary reservoir, close to 10,000 mana points. Lord Zeke pondered the implications, concluding that such magic was either the work of a high-level archmage or a coordinated effort using a spell circle to pool power from multiple casters. Considering which faction possessed the stealth and capability to construct such a complex array unnoticed, his suspicions centered on a single powerful nation. Unrolling a continent map, Lord Zeke pointed directly past the demon lands toward the largest empire on the landmass. Shadow of suspicion fell heavily upon their formidable neighbor, the Regalia Empire. Under a clear, open sky, colorful flowers bloom vibrantly across a serene, sunlit meadow. Surrounded by the green grass, two young girls sit together quietly, lost in their peaceful play. One gently presents a small orange flower, noting how lovely a flower crown would look, while her companion offers a soft, grateful thank you. They proudly present their handcrafted floral creations, beaming with delight as they show off the crowns of flowers they fashioned together. Ray praises their impressive skill, but as the young girls ask if his discussion has concluded, his tone shifts to a more serious matter. Inside the private quarters, Lord Zeke points directly at a single suspect behind the recent turmoil, the Regalia Empire. Realizing Ray has yet to be fully briefed on the world's political landscape, Zeke prepares to explain the geography of the continent. Unrolling a large map, Zeke details how the continent is divided into 8 distinct nations, starting with their peaceful home, the Kingdom of Nanol. He continues by introducing the second nation, War Best, a realm inhabited almost entirely by allied beastmen. Zeke names the third state, the Arcadian Papal State, devoted followers of goddess Estelle and allies to their land, while Ray secretly worries about how complicated things would become if they discovered his true status. Fourth territory is the Celia Kingdom, a realm said to enjoy the divine protection of a water dragon. Zeke further explains the fifth realm, the demi-human nation of Forest Philia, home to elves and dwarves, and the sixth, the Eel Nord Federation, a union of smaller independent states. He warns of the seventh nation, Tempest, an aggressive domain ruled by the demon race and a constant source of peril. Finally, Zeke turns focus to the eighth power, the tyrannical Regalia Empire. He outlines how the Regalia Empire grew from a small country into a major threat by performing unique hero summoning spells to repeatedly conquer neighboring lands, causing Ray to privately compare their actions to those of a true villain. Listen carefully as Lord Zeke pointed at the continental map, explaining how the Regalia Empire's ambition was nothing less than unifying the entire continent through endless war. Eileen questioned if the Regalia Empire was truly the mastermind behind the Great Monster March, to which Zeke admitted it was currently just a strong hunch. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Zeke declared that this urgent matter had to be reported immediately. Inquiring about his father's departure plans, the boy learned that Zeke intended to leave next week after instructing Gilbert to select 50 men from their forces. Asked about their destination, Zeke confirmed they were heading directly to the royal capital to report to His Majesty, insisting that the boy who defeated the monsters and witnessed the teleportation magic must present the report himself. Add to the surprise, Zeke announced that Chloe and Philia would also be joining them on the journey, prompting a cheerful response from the young girl. Hearing about the trip, Ares and Philia excitedly chimed in, eager to tag along and go shopping in the capital. Though he agreed to let them come, the young lord harbored internal anxiety about facing the king and meeting his father's terrifying second wife, Elizabeth. Shifting his focus to an urgent personal matter, he turned directly to Philia, stating that he needed her special help. Examining his status display after the meeting, he noticed his base stats had surged and he had acquired a new title, one beloved by the Thunder Spirit. Title granted significant benefits, reducing the mana cost of thunder magic, raising thunder magic level by 1, and making contracted spirits visible. He marveled at the incredible passive buffs, amazed that forming a contract could grant such power boost. Explaining to Philia that he wished to contract with a thunder spirit, he requested her assistance, promising that she too would be able to see spirits. Knowing that his little sister Philia possessed the unique innate ability known as spirit eyes, she could naturally perceive spirits without needing any contract. Asking her to sit beside him and check for nearby spirits, he prepared for the attempt while Philia happily agreed to help. As he waited, the beast person girl focused her spirit eyes, scanning the surroundings carefully until she suddenly gasped with realization. She alerted him that the entity was right behind him, urging him to cast thunder magic. Nodding in agreement, he focused his concentration and conjured a brilliant orb of crackling energy between his hands, feeling his mana flow outward as the invisible spirit began absorbing it. He listened as she encouraged him to bestow a name upon his new companion, prompting him to ask if she could discern its gender. She explained that spirits possess no fixed form or gender, taking shape purely according to the contractor's will. Realizing the pressure was entirely on his personal taste, he pondered deeply, confirming once more that it was indeed a thunder spirit. He received an enthusiastic nod from the young girl, while her mother watched quietly alongside them. Sudden wave of confidence washed over him as he declared that his decision was made. With a bright smile, he announced to the glowing presence that its name would be Hikarin. Sudden burst of light revealed a tiny, fairy-like thunder spirit, who immediately crossed her arms and dramatically berated him for having such dreadful taste in names. Stunned by the small creature's sassy demeanor, he could only stammer in shock as the others readily agreed that the name was indeed terrible. Floating proudly upon his open palms with miniature lightning bolts gleaming in her eyes, the newly named Hikarin marked the official start of their legendary partnership. As the tiny thunder spirit Hikarin sparkled brightly in front of them, Rei realized that due to her spirit eyes, Philia was the only one in their group capable of seeing the newly contracted entity. Seeing the magical spirit, Philia gasped softly in awe and delight. Excited to keep playing, Chloe apologized for the interruption and suggested they play house, idea everyone eagerly agreed to. Setting up their imaginary household on the blanket, they decided Chloe would act as the mother while Philia assumed the role of the child. Jumping right into character, Chloe welcomed Rei home with an imaginary dinner, which he praised enthusiastically. The game continued pleasantly as Philia offered her father a shoulder massage, leaving Rei thoroughly relaxed. Moving swiftly to the next dramatic scenario, Chloe suddenly reassigned the roles, declaring Philia the mother and herself the mistress. Shocked by the sudden shift in the story, Philia pointed accusingly and demanded to know who this mystery woman was. Her accusations escalated rapidly as she confronted Rei for being secretly married all along and betraying her trust. Reaching a theatrical climax, both girls grabbed onto him and demanded he choose between them, threatening dire consequences if he refused. Sweating nervously at the intense melodrama, he wondered where on earth children could have possibly learned such complicated tropes. Peaceful breeze rustled through the trees above the quiet clearing. Laughing off the wildly dramatic session of playing house, Rei smiled as the girls suddenly announced they were hungry and moved on to food. However, his light-hearted moment faded as he cast a grave, contemplative look toward the distant horizon. Noticing his sudden change in mood, Hikarin hovered close and offered to handle whatever troubles were weighing heavily on his mind. He stood silent as the tiny spirit continued her relentless chatter, proudly declaring that no secrets could be kept from her due to their binding contract. She insisted that she had been watching over him ever since he was an infant. Shocked by her claims, the young boy questioned how a spirit could form a pact with a newborn, since their wavelengths usually needed to align. The little spirit boasted that his rare, universal mana resonance made him popular among spirits of all elements, but she was the ultimate winner of the grand tournament held to claim him. Realizing the truth behind her words, he contemplated how the lingering influence of his past incarnation, the Limitless One, was manifesting even in his current life. His embarrassment mounted as the spirit listed specific, embarrassing moments from his early childhood, including the time he ruined his father's precious book and sought comfort with his mother. Attempting to regain his composure, he listened as she sweetly offered her ear, reassuring him that he could share any burden with her. Gazing down at his hands, he recalled the chilling sensation of taking a living creature's life for the very first time during the Great Monster March. Somber weight pressed upon his shoulders as he acknowledged the brutal reality of their world, knowing that protecting those he loved meant he might eventually have to take a human life without hesitation. Anticipating the inevitable future, he confessed his deep apprehension about the day he would be forced to make that terrible choice. Taken aback by his gloomy reflection, The thunder spirit dismissed his worries with a sudden, cheerful burst of confidence. Floating triumphantly above him, she offered a simple solution, urging him to become so overwhelmingly powerful that he would never need to kill anyone at all. She explained that if his strength could completely shatter an enemy's will to fight, he would possess the absolute authority to decide who lives and who dies. As he pondered whether he could truly attain such absolute power, she proudly struck a pose, promising to watch his back as his high thunder spirit partner. Moving across the field together, she teased that her current small form was merely due to his low mana supply, promising to transform into a splendid, curvaceous body once he matured, prompting them both to pledge their mutual support. A warm smile spread across his face as he finally felt the genuine bond of their newly formed pact, his heart growing lighter. With renewed focus and unwavering determination, he stepped forward, firmly resolving to grow stronger for the journey ahead. He redoubled his efforts, devoting himself to training more intensely than ever before at the family estate. Spurring himself into action with a fierce yell, the young noble pressed forward, his wooden blade striking against his opponent's weapon in a flurry of quick blows. Panting heavily from the exertion, he paused to catch his breath, marveling at how formidable Master Eileen remained as she stood before him, completely unperturbed while he struggled merely to dodge her movements. Refusing to back down, he called upon his magic to activate a weapon enchantment, seeking to tip the scales in his favor. Sharp clashing of their training swords echoed through the courtyard as he launched another assault, searching intently for any opening in her defense. Deciding to escalate his strategy, he layered fire magic directly onto his enchanted blade, surprising his instructor with his impressive execution of stacked magic. Seeing his progress, Eileen responded in kind by enveloping her own weapon in radiant flames, unleashing the true authority of her title as the blazing magic swordsman. Recognized the immense prestige of her title, a rank granted only to those who master both high-level swordsmanship and fire magic, surpassing even his mother's skill. Driven back by the overwhelming heat of her flaming blade, he strategically pivoted, invoking light magic to create a sudden flash that momentarily blinded her. She raised her arm to guard her eyes against the glare. He seized the split-second opportunity, leaping forward with unwavering confidence to strike. Determined to hold his ground, Ray locked eyes with his opponent and lunged forward with a sharp swing of his sword, confident in his ability to land strike. Before his blade could connect, she leapt high into the air, vanishing from his line of sight and leaving him searching the sky in disbelief. Landing fluidly behind him, Eileen effortlessly pinned him to the ground, chuckling at how naive he had been to fall for such a simple maneuver. She stretched his sore muscles. She reminded him that raw stats and magic were not enough. True mastery required honing proper martial technique. Despite his groans of discomfort, she gently patted his head, acknowledging that expecting perfect form from an 8-year-old was a bit demanding. She marveled at his incredible growth speed without enchantments, which Ray attributed to the passive effects of his unique title. Their discussion was interrupted as Ares approached, quietly presenting her own improved stats and newly acquired titles to Eileen. Ray watched intently as Ares stood before her mother, noticing a lingering sense of distance and tension between the young girl and himself. Without offering a single word to Ray, Ares abruptly turned on her heel and departed down the grand hallway. Eileen chuckled fondly at her daughter's departure, wishing the girl could simply be more honest with her feelings. Left alone with Eileen, Ray voiced his concern, wondering if he had done something wrong to make his sister avoid him ever since their earlier talk. He explained how she constantly distanced herself within the estate, watching his training from afar rather than approaching him. Eileen offered a comforting smile, advising him to be patient and wait until Ares was ready to work through her feelings on her own. Shifting the topic, Eileen inquired about his new title, leading Ray to explain how Philia had helped him forge a contract with a small thunder spirit. Intrigued by the rare title, Eileen asked for a demonstration, prompting Ray to call upon Hikarin, who cheerfully agreed to lend her power. Steadied his stance, gripping the wooden training staff with total focus as lightning crackled around his frame. The tiny spirit channeling her power beside him, he invoked a weapon enchantment, surrounding the tip of his staff with blinding elemental energy. Unleashing the stored electricity in a single forward thrust, a violent blast of thunder magic surged across the hall, leaving his audience gasping in utter astonishment. Exhausted from a massive release, the boy collapsed onto the floor to catch his breath, unaware that his sister had been quietly watching his display from the corridor. Looking up at the shattered stone structure ahead, he listened as Eileen marveled at the sheer magnitude of his magic. Alarmed by the deafening explosion, Lord Zeke called out from above, prompting the young mage to bow respectfully and apologize for destroying a pillar during practice. After the commotion settled, Eileen commended his extraordinary technique, to which he humbly offered his gratitude. He went on to analyze his magical limits, noting that while spirit contracts usually conserve mana, blasts of such magnitude require immense reserves that cannot be used consecutively. She outlined their goals before departure, emphasizing that mastering his lightning element and deepening his bond with the spirit would be their top priorities. Eager to train further, the boy and his fairy companion cheerfully pledged to work hard together. Meanwhile, Eileen watched thoughtfully from afar as Ares lingered in the hallway, still unable to approach her brother directly. Time passed quickly, and soon the day arrived for their journey to the royal capital. As he finished packing his travel trunk, a quiet regret weighed on his mind over never finding the chance to break the ice with his sister. Interrupting his thoughts, the door unexpectedly opened as Ares stepped into the room with a sharp, guarded announcement of her presence. She stood nervously before him, her fingers twisting her hem as she struggled to find the words she wanted to say. She gathered her courage to speak about the incident from the other day, earnestly offering her heartfelt thanks for saving her life. Caught off guard, he clarified if she was referring back to the Great Monster March, to which she confirmed without hesitation. She explained that after he collapsed, serious conversations followed, and seeing how busy he was with training kept her from bringing it up sooner. Bowing deeply, she admitted that delaying it only made it harder to speak, but she felt compelled to express her genuine gratitude. Her emotional declaration left him wide-eyed, caught off guard by the depth of her sincerity. Waving his hands in modest embarrassment, he assured her that no thanks were necessary, as he simply acted on what he felt compelled to do. He went on to apologize for not arriving earlier to prevent her injuries, but she smiled warmly, pointing out that her own weakness was to blame and that she was merely grateful to have survived. Hesitating as she shifted nervously on her feet, she paused, leaving him waiting curiously to see what she would say next. Declaring that she still hadn't properly thanked him, she suddenly asked him to close his eyes, leaving him completely bewildered. Ares looked down earnestly, expressing that she still felt the need to properly thank him for his assistance, despite his insistence that no gratitude was required. He reiterates that he simply acted on his own desire to help, though she remains adamant that she wouldn't feel right without expressing her appreciation. Looking up into his eyes, she softly asks if showing her gratitude would truly be a problem. Caught off guard by her earnest gaze, he hastily reassures her that it is not a problem at all. Taking a timid step forward, she hesitatingly asks him to close his eyes, prompting a puzzled assent as he complies. Leaning in close, she gently presses a light kiss onto his cheek, leaving him standing completely frozen in surprise. His eyes widen in utter shock as a faint blush warms his face. Stammering in embarrassment, she turns away slightly, murmuring that this was her way of saying thank you. Flustered and turning beet red, she flails her arms in a frantic attempt to dismiss the gesture, insisting that it didn't mean anything special before rushing out of the room. Touching his cheek softly, he realizes with a stunned shock that this was the very first time he had ever been kissed, even counting his entire past life. Trembling slightly in disbelief, his inner thoughts focus on how remarkably soft her lips felt against his skin. Light knock interrupts his thoughts as Chloe enters the hallway, noting his pleased expression with amused curiosity while delivering a message. She informs him that Lord Zeke requests an audience before their impending departure, prompting him to acknowledge the message promptly. Shortly after, Lord Zeke and Eileen greet him as he enters the study for their scheduled conversation. Brought up the subject of his young son's status as they settled in for the private meeting. When asked directly about the topic of discussion, the patriarch confirmed that they needed to talk about the boy's registered abilities and social standing. Their upcoming journey to the royal capital for the victory parade required formal reporting. They would have to inform the crown about the surprise attack by the orcs and the extraordinary fact that a young boy had single-handedly defeated a B-rank orc general. While the king was a wise leader, the surrounding nobility posed a significant concern. The young prodigy wondered if his full status would be displayed to everyone, prompting his father to explain the delicate political balance among the court. Although the monarch could be trusted to guard confidential reports, information had a habit of leaking through ambitious aristocrats. The head of the house pointed out the dangers of court gossip and political maneuvering. Both parents emphasized that revealing unusual special power naturally attracted individuals with ill intentions. To protect him, they were determined to keep his titles concealed and eliminate any risk of public exposure. With a firm nod, the plan was set to disclose the details only to His Majesty and their closest allies. He strictly instructed the boy to remain equally cautious about revealing his capabilities. Preparing to conclude as part of the meeting, the Lord announced his departure, noting that the true discussion was about to begin. As he stepped away, the mother asked the young boy to stay behind. Curious about the sudden shift in tone, the boy asked what else remained to be discussed. She revealed that during their time in the capital, they would be attending the birthday celebration for the realm's second princess. She explained that while her husband rarely attended formal royal birthday parties, this occasion would serve as the boy's official debut into high society, surrounded by the realm's elite. The boy pondered the mention of the second princess, recalling that she was roughly the same age as his older sister. However, his mother quickly pivoted to what she considered the most crucial matter. The bright, beaming smile, she gleefully announced that the real purpose of attending the party was for him to choose a young lady he liked. Stunned by the unexpected turn of conversation, the boy gaped in utter disbelief, trying to process his mother's sudden matchmaking enthusiasm. Rejoining the conversation with casual confidence, the father added that as high-ranking nobility, the boy could simply approach any girl he found interesting without fear of rejection. As his father offered nonchalant advice on social interaction, the young boy stood completely deadpan, thoroughly unimpressed by the adult's casual handling of his social life. Wishing him luck with cheerful enthusiasm, his mother offered a parting blessing, while the young boy quietly lamented that such overwhelming pressure only made the prospect of talking to anyone far more intimidating. Flatly declined as his father offered to instruct him on the intricate nuances of high society, though the Lord was determined to be heard regardless. Interrupting the lesson, young Philia excitedly announced that the carriage was prepared, bringing relief to the young boy as his father continued rambling animatedly in the background. Outside, the grand mansion stood serene beneath a clear sky as the household finalized preparations for departure. Horses were fully harnessed, standing patiently in anticipation of the long journey ahead. Reviewing the departure retinue, Lord Zeke asked whether the gathered maids and soldiers would be sufficient, to which his son agreed that they had more than enough protection. The young lord questioned whether Chloe and her daughter truly needed to come along. His father firmly reminded him that an attendant's place was beside her master, a sentiment seconded by Gilbert. Philia tearfully vowed to give her absolute best despite the sadness of leaving her father behind, causing Gilbert to sigh at his daughter's dramatic nature. Turning to his wife, Zeke formally entrusted the governance of the domain to Eileen, who leaned in close to assure him that everything would remain perfectly secure under her watch. Watching them, Ares couldn't help but recall her mother's private inner desires and extreme reluctance to be separated from her husband. Considering the complex romantic dynamics awaiting them at the capital, she wisely decided it was best to pretend she hadn't overheard anything. Turning back to her brother, Ares looked at him with an affectionate yet quiet gaze as the moment of farewell arrived. Leaning forward, she placed a tender kiss on his cheek, leaving him slightly flustered as memories of their time together rushed through his mind. Offering him a bright, genuine smile, she offered her heartfelt wishes for him to take care on the road. Turning her smile with a gentle expression of his own, he softly agreed that it was time for him to depart. Prompted by his father calling out to him, he quickly brushed off his lingering hesitation and boarded the carriage, ready to set off toward the royal capital. He sat comfortably in the carriage alongside his companions, settled in for the journey ahead while his father signaled that everything was ready to depart. Outside, those left behind watched on. Ares stood steadfastly as Eileen offered a reassuring smile to her husband, who wiped away a quiet tear of farewell. Turning back with a cheerful grin, Zeke officially declared their departure. As the wheels began to turn and the carriage rolled forward along the tree-lined path, the young traveler leaned toward the window, quietly anticipating his very first visit to the royal capital. Before setting off on their journey, the family took a quiet moment together in the open fields near their carriage, as Eileen crouched down to comfort young Philia alongside Ray. 2 weeks elapsed on the road, as the heavy horse-drawn carriage steadily made its way through the dense woodland paths towards their destination. Inside the swaying cabin, Ray succumbed to the exhaustion of long-distance travel, drifting off into a peaceful sleep. Waking from his slumber, he listened as Lord Zeke pointed out the window, drawing everyone's attention to the imposing sight of the royal capital looming in the distance. Peering eagerly through the carriage window, the young boy gaped at the massive stone fortress walls and tall spires guarding the city entrance. Marveling at the scale, he remarked on how these ramparts far surpassed the size of the walls in their home arcade. As the carriage drew near the checkpoint, heavily armed guards positioned at the gates watched the approaching vehicle. Lord Zeke promptly presented their official identification papers to the armored guard, who formally recognized him as Marquis Runwalker. The travel documents confirmed, the massive wooden portcullis slowly lifted, clearing the path forward. Passing through the grand archway, the family was greeted by the bustling expanse of the royal capital, featuring broad stone avenues capable of accommodating countless carriages. Looking out at the lively street-side vendors, the children excitedly discussed visiting the local eateries smelling of delicious food. Eileen readily agreed to their requests, promising that they would go shopping together soon. She reminded them, however, that today's priority was visiting the main mansion to meet with Elisa and the others. As their carriage rolled further into the heart of the city, Ray's attention was drawn to a massive, dome-roofed grand structure, which Zeke identified as the prestigious Cardia Academy. He listened quietly as his father pointed out that Cardia Academy was the very institution where both he and Eris had graduated, and where all the children were slated to enroll as well. Looking out at the massive structure in awe, the young boy listened as his father warmly recalled meeting both Eris and Elisa there during his second year, chuckling about how the two competitive young women got themselves suspended almost immediately after enrolling due to their constant fighting. That legendary duel had completely wrecked the academy training grounds, with Eris unleashing destructive lightning magic, while Elisa countered with torrential water spells, leaving the surrounding walls scorched black and the arena a flooded, muddy ruin, while weeping upperclassmen and instructors were left to clean up the mess. Defending her past actions with a pout, his mother insisted that Elisa had been the sole instigator, constantly provoking fights because she refused to admit that Eris was the more naturally gifted spellcaster. Hearing her stubbornly justify that she simply couldn't back down from a challenge, he was quietly amused to discover this fierce, competitive side of his mother's personality. He playfully asked if she had really been that formidably strong back in her student days. She indignantly affirmed her superior magical prowess without a second thought. His father teasingly added that alongside their academic suspension, both rebellious maidens were sentenced to perform heavy daily chores instead of attending classes, prompting a flustered outburst of protest from her. She finally demanded that he stop exposing her embarrassing past, forcing her husband to raise his hands with a light-hearted, apologizing grin. Steering the discussion back to practical matters, his father explained that standard academy attendance lasted 4 full years for students aged 12 to 16, noting that Marco and Aries would begin the following year, while young Philia would only overlap with him for a single term. As Philia earnestly asked if she could attend alongside her beloved older brother, he quietly reflected on the mention of Marco, realizing he possessed 2 half-brothers whom he had not seen since infancy and knew virtually nothing about. Cat-eared girl sighed in disappointment at how briefly their paths would cross at school, but he offered her a gentle, sympathetic smile, explaining that they simply had to abide by the age regulations. Their light-hearted conversation was suddenly cut short when Chloe and Philia spotted their destination through the window, calling out joyfully that the family mansion was finally within view. Eagerly crowding against the carriage glass, the 3 children gasped in wonder as the grand aristocratic residence came into clear sight. Moments later, the heavy iron gates parted to admit the carriage into a sprawling, meticulously maintained courtyard where ranked household attendants stood in formal reception line. Stepping forward to greet the arriving party, Lady Elizabeth Runwalker, his father's second wife, offered a warm and breathtaking welcome, her poised presence capturing the young boy's immediate attention. She stood quietly beside Zeke as heavy, hurried footsteps echoed across the estate grounds, signaling the approach of a young boy running toward his father. The eldest son, Marco, arrived with heavy steps, looking quite stout. Zeke greeted his large son warmly, remarking on how much he had grown, while Aries and Revelt observed the heavy-set boy in utter astonishment. Concerned for her son's health, she urged Zeke to intervene, explaining that Marco had done nothing but gorge himself on popular capital sweets since arriving. Marco cheerily brushed off her worries, boasting that his body was fine because he inherited magic from her. Yet she remained deeply concerned, knowing that an unfit body would severely struggle in battle against monsters. Interrupting the conversation, the sharp-featured second son, Winton, stepped past his heavy brother. Without hesitation, he bluntly told Marco that he was in the way and asked if he had ever considered losing weight. These two young men were Lady Elizabeth's sons, Marco, the heavy-set eldest, and Winton, the stern second son. Observing the dramatic difference between the two brothers, Revelt realized these were his half-siblings, while his young companions softly noted that they had expected the brothers to look more like Revelt. Zeke greeted Winton, taking note of his disciplined appearance. Winton dryly replied that he refrained from overindulging in sweets, leaving the younger children bewildered by his sharp, stoic demeanor. Turning his gaze toward Revelt, Winton silently evaluated his younger half-brother, prompting Revelt to offer a polite greeting despite the chilly atmosphere. Suddenly breaking the tension, Marco marched over and playfully pinched Revelt's face, chuckling in amazement at how much the little runt had grown. Revelt managed an awkward smile while rubbing his squeezed cheeks, as Aries and Philia looked on with pity and amusement. Addressing the gathered family, Lady Elizabeth acknowledged Eileen's children, to which Eileen proudly confirmed that they were her absolute joy. Beneath their refined smiles and perfect noble composure, a crackle of fierce, unspoken rivalry flashed between the two wives. Moving past the subtle tension, Revelt and Aries stepped forward to pay their respects to Lady Elizabeth, followed by young Philia, who cheerfully introduced herself. Looking gently down at Revelt, Lady Elizabeth remarked that he was only an infant when they last met, warmly inviting him to simply address her as Mother Elisa. She presents herself with effortless warmth, yet Revelt quietly notes to himself how different her demeanor feels compared to his past impressions, offering a polite assent aloud. Observing the young boy from behind as he stands among the family, the second wife considers his hidden potential. While other children remain within normal bounds, she recognizes that the staggering amount of magical power residing within Revelt places him on a completely different level for his age. As the boy offers another cheerful response, she quietly acknowledges the truth of his bloodline, musing to herself that he is unmistakably the child of those two. Nearby, while the young cat girl Philia smiles cheerfully, the eldest son Marco watches on with a dark, sinister grin shadowing his face. High within the grand capital castle, word reached the monarch that Marquis Runwalker had arrived in the city, seeking a formal audience. Trusted advisor bowed low before the throne, confirming that a messenger had delivered the request just moments earlier. Explained that he had already dispatched a reply, stating a representative would be sent later, while noting that the pressing matter was undoubtedly the upcoming Great March. Mused that for the Marquis to make the journey himself, the border territory must have successfully repelled this year's invasion force as well. King acknowledged the sentiment, though he could not help but express his distaste for the term Great March, having sat upon the throne for 18 years. Clenched his fist tightly, emphasizing that their northern land stood as the kingdom's sole bastion against the Regalia Empire. Should that Marquis fall, enemy forces would reach the capital in no time. Raising his voice in frustration, the ruler slammed his hand onto the armrest, scoffing at the central nobles who failed to understand the danger, worried only about what the border lords might do with an army while being the first to panic in an invasion. The advisor quickly urged restraint, warning his sovereign against criticizing the royal brothers' faction so openly where unknown ears might be listening. Monarch scoffed in indifference, declaring that it mattered little if spies overheard their private conversation. Shifting the subject, he ordered the meeting with the Marquis to be scheduled after the upcoming 5th birthday celebration of Princess Marina, ensuring his official duties would be cleared by then. Realizing the implication, the attendant asked if the Marquis intended to attend the birthday party in person this year. which the king confirmed. He added casually that the noble had also expressed a desire to bring his son along for the audience. Upon hearing this, the monarch leaped up from his seat in sudden alarm, suspecting an attempt to pursue his daughter Marina's hand in marriage, while his advisor urged him to stay calm. The attendant clarified that it was not the chubby eldest son who usually attended celebrations, but rather the younger son born to Lady Erislit, who had remained in the marquisate until now and was visiting the capital for the very first time. While the monarch mused about making a special exception for the young visitor, his fierce guard declared that he would personally cut down anyone who dared ask for Princess Marina's hand, prompting a quiet reminder that defeating the Marquis was impossible. Concluding their discussion, the king instructed his advisor to arrange the official schedule and inform the visiting noble party. Meanwhile, after 2 long weeks spent trapped inside a carriage, the young prodigy exercised outdoors, swinging his training spear with crisp precision. Watching him practice, the tiny thunder spirit hovered nearby and remarked on how long it had been since she last saw him handle a spear. He explained that he needed to loosen his stiff muscles ahead of his upcoming audience with the king tomorrow and Princess Marina's birthday celebration shortly after. Pausing his exercise, he noted that he had more downtime than expected, though he wondered why Philia and Clona were late for their scheduled outing to look at dresses. At that very moment, rapid footsteps echoed down the castle corridors as 2 young girls hurried along. Young noble girl Philia struggled to keep pace with her catkin companion Clona as they rushed through the hallway. Double-checking their preparations for the day, the 2 girls happily confirmed they had remembered their handkerchiefs and refreshing drinks. Reassured that everything was in order, they eagerly set off toward the courtyard to meet their older brother. However, as they rounded a corner, a looming figure stepped into their path and abruptly blocked their passage. Startled by the sudden obstacle, Philia gasped as her older half-brother Marco looked down at them with a cold, dismissive glare. Sensing the tense atmosphere, young Clona looked up nervously at the heavy-set noble youth. His eyes narrowed with dark intent as he addressed his half-sister, prompting her to look back at him with confusion. Pointing directly at Clona, Marco demanded that Philia hand over the catkin girl, so he could claim her as his own personal attendant. He wore a sinister smirk, arrogantly declaring that they should feel honored while secretly harboring dark intentions to break the young catkin maid. Unsettled by his chilling smile, the young girls recoiled in fear. He demanded that Clona become his personal servant. Philia boldly stood up to him, shouting that Clona belonged as Ray's handmaiden and was not an object to be taken. Refusing to back down, the arrogant noble lunged forward to grab them, asserting his authority over his half-sister as both girls pleaded for him to stop. As he harshly shoved Philia aside, Clona fiercely bit down on his arm in defense, forcing a pained roar from him. Though he angrily questioned if she dared defy her master, the brave young maid declared unequivocally that Lord Ray was her true master. Enraged by her defiance, his shadowy figure loomed over the tiny maid, his mind consumed by violent resentment. Just as he raised a heavy fist to strike the girl, Philia intervened, casting a wind spell that knocked the bully off balance. Recovering quickly, his face twisted in sheer malice as he glared down at the young princess. Without hesitation, he lashed out and struck Philia across the face with cruel force. Violent impact sent the young noble girl crashing onto the cold floor of the corridor. She lay prone and stunned on the ground, while her terrified handmaiden cried out her name. Marco stood triumphantly over young Philia, who remained collapsed on the stone walkway after receiving a harsh blow. Seeing her mistress on the ground, Clona rushed forward in distress to check on her. Kneeling beside the bruised girl, the young maid anxiously inquired about her well-being, while Philia could only clutch her swollen, bruised cheek in silent pain. Arrogantly scoffing at their distress, Marco declared that this was the natural consequence of a mere handmaiden stepping out of line. Cruelly instructing Clona to bid her farewells before noon, he boasted that he would petition his father to claim her as his personal servant before marching off with a wicked chuckle. Struggling to her feet after Marco departed, Philia insisted she was uninjured enough to walk and urged her companion to come with her, so they could search for her brother Ray. Meanwhile, out near the courtyard gardens, Ray walked along with his spirit companion when he noticed the 2 young girls approaching from down the corridor. His eyes widened in sudden alarm as the duo drew closer, immediately catching sight of the red, tinder welt marking his sister's face. Overcome with tears and relief, both girls threw themselves into his arms, sobbing loudly as they clung to him for comfort. Holding them close, he gently inquired what had happened to cause such an injury to Philia's cheek, while checking if Clona was harmed as well. Through heavy tears, Clona recounted how Lord Marco had tried to forcibly take her away as his handmaiden, explaining that Philia had stepped in and taken the blow to protect her. Dark, ominous shadow fell over Ray's face as the realization settled in that his half-brother Marco had resorted to physical violence against a defenseless child. His right hand clenched into a tight, trembling fist as a silent, cold rage surged through his veins. Suppressing his anger to keep from scaring the children, he softly reassured Philia and placed his palm near her cheek to cast restoration magic. Soothing water magic enveloped her face, completely healing the bruised tissue and erasing her pain within moments. Turning his gaze toward Clona next, he offered a gentle word of comfort, acknowledging how terrifying the ordeal must have been for her. He gently praised her bravery, reassuring the young girl that she could leave the rest of the matter entirely in his hands. Tears of relief welled in her eyes as she clung to him, finding solace in his firm promise to protect her. The clear objective set, purposeful footsteps echoed down the stone corridor. Beside him, Ares fumed with indignation, declaring that Marco's actions were unforgivable and demanding that he be given a thorough thrashing. Agreement burned in his gaze as he quietly concurred with her anger. Approaching the private quarters, he addressed the attendant stationed outside, requesting that she announce his presence to Lord Zeke and Lord Marco. Maid bowed apologetically, explaining that Lord Zeke had issued strict orders not to be disturbed unless the matter was urgent. Fixing her with an unyielding glare, he questioned whether she was implying his visit was not urgent, prompting her to stammer in flustered panic. Interrupting the tension, Lady Elizabeth stepped forward to inquire about the commotion. Upon learning that Ray wished to discuss something serious with Zeke and Marco, she studied the young boy's resolute expression. Satisfied by his composure, Elizabeth granted him permission to enter, which he acknowledged with polite gratitude. Grand doors slid open, allowing him to stride straight into the inner chamber. Inside, Lord Zeke looked up in surprise from beside Marco, asking what was happening and whether an emergency had occurred. Marco scoffed arrogantly while snack food filled his hand, complaining that his half-brother was utterly incapable of reading the room. Ignoring the insult, Ray stated directly that he had a confrontation waiting for Marco, leaving Lord Zeke puzzled as to what the conversation could possibly be regarding. Marco simply chuckled dismissively, stuffing food in his mouth while claiming to have absolutely no idea what he could mean. He appeared utterly shameless to Ray, while young Philia remained fuming with anger in the background. Directing his words to Marco, the young boy demanded to know how he could say such things after physically striking Philia. Surprised by the sudden confrontation, the rest of the family gasped as Marco merely let out a careless laugh. Minton stepped forward to urge their parents to remain calm, while Lord Zeke firmly demanded that Marco explain himself. Grinning dismissively, Marco claimed he was simply teaching Philia a lesson because she refused to listen, while Ray incredulously questioned his twisted justification. Ray laid out the truth before everyone, recounting how Marco had tried to force Clona to become his handmaiden and struck Philia when they both resisted. Zeke pressed his son on whether the accusation was true. Marco stuttered nervously before trying to shift the blame onto the servant girls. Continuing his defense, Marco whined that Philia wouldn't obey him and even dared to bite him when he tried to take Clona. Laughing arrogantly, the eldest son proclaimed his intention to report it to their father anyway, so he could personally break the insolent girl. Lord Zeke leaned forward from his chair in disbelief at such foolishness, while Marco tried in vain to appeal to his father. Pressing his point, Ray pointed out that Philia's cheek was left swollen and bleeding, leaving young Clona terrified by Marco's threats. Looking at Marco with cold fury, the young protagonist asked how he could inflict pain on such small children without feeling a shred of remorse. Screaming back, the spoiled boy insisted he felt no guilt whatsoever, shouting that it was their own fault for disobeying him until Zeke finally ordered him to stop. Unable to contain his rage any longer, Ray lunged forward and delivered a devastating punch right to Marco's jaw, sending him crashing onto the table and shattering the tea set. As the echo of the blow resounded outside the manor, Zeke shouted out in alarm for Ray to stop. One day prior, high within the towering white spires of a grand castle. An important discussion took place in a royal chamber. Sovereign sat upon his throne, confirming that an audience with Marquis Runwalker was officially scheduled for the day after tomorrow. Youthful, mysterious smile played upon a high-status listener's lips as they expressed a keen desire to meet the young noble. Meanwhile, an intense struggle broke out inside the estate as Winton desperately restrained Ray, who had lost control and lunged wildly at his older brother Marco. The quick, decisive maneuver, Winton managed to separate the enraged boy from Marco, dragging him away across the courtyard while Ray gradually came back to his senses. Winton scolded Ray sternly for resorting to lethal force, while nearby, Lady Elizabeth rushed to tend to the trembling Marco. As the dust settled, Marco sat cowering on the floor in utter terror, while Ray hung his head, realizing that rage had completely taken over his mind. Addressing Marco's unacceptable behavior, Winton declared that since Marco would be entering the academy in half a year, a strict subordinate would be assigned to retrain his lazy body and mind immediately. Further ordered Marco to remain confined to the mansion and barred him from attending the upcoming birthday party, leaving Marco in shock, while Ray noted he had never seen Winton so furious. Demanding a clear acknowledgement of the punishment, Winton stared down at his younger brother until Marco tearfully agreed. Turning to Lady Elizabeth, Winton apologized for the harsh judgment, but she calmly accepted it, acknowledging that Marco was entirely in the wrong and needed to reflect on his actions. Gently placing a hand on Ray's shoulder, Winton acknowledged his valid feelings, but reminded him that his outburst had gone too far, instructing him to stay in the mansion and reflect for the day. The servants escorted Marco away. Ray walked down the hallway in deep remorse, acknowledging to himself that he truly lost control. Interrupting his gloomy thoughts, Eileen appeared alongside Chloe and young Philia, concerned by the commotion, while the little beast child brightly greeted her brother, gently offered words of comfort to the young ones, offering a sincere apology for the fright they had endured. The little girl chimed in to assure him that she had been bravely protected throughout the ordeal. Overhearing the exchange, Winton commended Philia's bravery with a warm touch, before politely requesting that the others leave so he could speak with Eris and Elsa privately. As they walked down the corridor together, the young girl checked on him to make sure he was all right, observing that their brother Marco had surely learned his lesson today. Moments later, the little cat girl suddenly pressed her forehead against him, surprising him completely. Chloe quickly reassured him with a smile, explaining that head-butting was merely a feline sign of deep affection, while jokingly offering her daughter's hand in marriage, a suggestion immediately dismissed given her tender age. Group continued along the grand hallway, the light-hearted banter easing the lingering tension from earlier. Chloe expressed her genuine gratitude to him for taking such good care of Clona, while tiny Hikarin floated nearby, praising his effort as well. Took in their kind words, his wide, expressive eyes reflecting a sense of quiet relief. Together, they made their way past the tall windows of the estate, leaving the afternoon's chaos behind them. Following day, carriage wheels rumbled steadily over the paved roads toward a monumental destination. Arriving at the towering royal palace, Winton guided the young lord as he looked up in awe at the sheer size of the royal residence, preparing for their audience with the king. Escorted through magnificent marble halls by attendants, they were led directly toward the royal throne room. Standing before the massive, ornate doors, Winton cautioned the young boy to remain on his best behavior during the audience, prompting him to take a deep, steadying breath to calm his surging nerves. Grand doors parted to reveal the royal throne room, where guards stood at attention along the carpeted path leading straight to the seated monarch. King Raymond Nanol of the Kingdom of Nanol welcomed Marquis Runwalker, noting with a grave demeanor that 3 years had passed since their last meeting, while the Marquis offered his formal apologies for not visiting more frequently. Observing the sovereign, he mentally noted that King Raymond Nanol appeared to be a surprisingly gentle monarch, as the ruler agreed to proceed directly to the core matter. Stepping forward, Zeke introduced his young son to present the details regarding how they thwarted the Great March, as well as to bring light to a strange anomaly surrounding the event. Preparing himself to address the high court, the young boy paused to draw a deep, steadying breath. As the report unfolded, the king deliberated on the revelation of a teleportation magic circle. Seeking input from Merlin, the Magic Division commander, regarding the immense effort such magic required. Merlin confirmed the assessment, revealing that roughly 100 orcs had been relocated and pointing out that an operation of such magnitude strongly implied the involvement of the Regalia Empire. Heavy silence settled over the grand throne room as the royal assembly weighed the grave political and military ramifications of the commander's report. Breaking the stillness, Night Division Commander Hendricks raised an inquisitive hand, pressing for further clarification on the claim that a child had repelled the assault. Hendricks emphasized how formidable B-rank monsters were even for seasoned units, casting visible skepticism on the idea that nearly 100 could be subdued. Fixating his sharp gaze on the young noble, the knight captain voiced his outright doubt that a single child could have defeated such a force unassisted. To prove the truth of the account, Hendricks proposed a test, declaring he would only believe it if the boy could defeat a military squad, including its leader, leaving the young noble utterly stunned. Royal Guard Commander Gain immediately voiced his objection, arguing that demanding such a combat test from an 8-year-old child was blatantly unfair. Despite the protest, Lord Zeke remained resolute, calmly declaring that they would accept the proposed challenge. Acknowledging the agreement, King Raymond granted his royal approval and scheduled the official contest for the following noon. The matter settled, the king formally concluded the session, requesting only that Marquis Runwalker remain behind for a private audience. As Merlin offered a comforting pat on his head, the young boy couldn't help but sigh inwardly at how rapidly the situation had escalated out of hand. He received quiet words of encouragement from a hooded figure standing nearby, assuring him that his magical capabilities would carry him through, though he should still give it his all. Hesitantly, the young boy nodded in agreement. Afterwards, his father offered a quick apology for how things unfolded, which he brushed off easily, while privately wondering if the Royal Guard commander held a past rivalry with his family. The king then addressed Lord Zeke directly, explaining that there was a specific reason he had asked them to remain behind. Monarch explained that he wanted the boy to keep someone company, prompting a puzzled look from Ray just as energetic footsteps echoed in the room. A vibrant young girl burst through the doors, excitedly calling out to her father as the king welcomed her presence. Introducing herself with bright confidence, she revealed her identity as Alexia Nanol, first princess of the kingdom. She cheerfully greeted Marquis Runwalker and young Ray, expressing her hope that they would all get along well. Within the neighboring kingdom of Nanol, King Raymond rules alongside his 3 wives and 4 children, among whom are first Prince Albert, second Prince Alex, and second Princess Marina. Standing above her siblings in fame, First Princess Alexia Nanol has earned a reputation as a prodigy. At just 14 years old, she stands as Cardia Academy's top student in both martial arts and magic, widely regarded as the most gifted of the royal lineage. Upon meeting the royal guest, Marquis Zicart offers a respectful greeting, expressing that it is an honor to meet her. She warmly replies that she has eagerly awaited this encounter, having heard of his legendary exploits left behind at the academy. Without hesitation, the young princess extends her hand forward and issues a bold, direct request, asking the Marquis to engage in a duel with her. Sudden declaration leaves the young nobles standing nearby utterly stunned. He double-checks if she truly means to challenge him. She confirms it with sparkling eyes, admitting that she has heard of his legendary skill and desperately wishes to witness his spearmanship firsthand. As Winton recalls rumors of her obsession with fighting formidable opponents, the young boy observes her closely, realizing she truly is the battle fanatic people claimed, though he secretly hopes to see his father fight as well. Confident smile spreads across the Lord's face as he considers the challenge. His young son watches attentively, waiting to see how the proposal will unfold. Instead of accepting directly, the Marquis presents a condition, suggesting that she test her skills against his young son first, promising that if she can defeat him, he will step up as her opponent. The unexpected offer leaves the young boy completely flabbergasted. Delighted by the prospect, the vibrant princess scoops the boy into a tight, affectionate embrace, beaming as she declares her love for taking care of little ones, while he frantically protests that he is fully capable of changing on his own. Giggling as she ushers him toward the changing area, she dismisses his embarrassed questions about whether she should be preparing herself instead, insisting that he simply address her by her name. She explains that her academy uniform is already enchanted with impact and magic dampening protections, requiring her only to retrieve her weapon, all while urging him to hurry and get ready. From outside the changing room, loud, chaotic commotion echoes as she attempts to force him out of his clothes, while he screams in desperation to stop her from pulling his trousers off. He stood fully suited in the practical combat vest, scowling slightly as Zeke and Winton noted how well it fit him despite his clear irritation. Kneeling down to meet his level, Zeke stressed the vital necessity of winning this match, explaining that the duel would allow the royal observers to witness his true capabilities beforehand. When the young boy pressed for the genuine, underlying motive behind the sudden fight, his father simply chuckled awkwardly, admitting that dealing with it himself was just too much trouble. Zeke went on to inform him about Princess Alexia's rare talents, noting her mastery over water, earth, and wind magic alongside her dual-wielding swordsmanship. Moments later, Princess Alexia stepped forward in her tailored combat attire, dual blades strapped to her waist, reminding the Marquis of her deal to challenge him next if she defeated his son. Knight Captain stepped in as referee, asking both sides if they were fully prepared before declaring the rules. The match would continue until one surrendered or was rendered unable to fight. He emphasized that while magic was permitted, any life-threatening spells were strictly forbidden, leaving both combatants standing side by side in quiet concentration. Taking her stance, the princess candidly admitted that she would refrain from going all out, treating this match merely as a warm-up exercise for her intended duel with the Marquis. Smirking at her casual dismissal, the young boy accepted the challenge with quiet amusement, unbothered by being viewed as a mere stepping stone. The moment the signal to begin echoed through the hall, he lunged forward with astonishing speed, driving his weapon straight toward her and instantly forcing her onto the defensive. She caught his rapid strike just in time, wide-eyed with surprise as the sheer force of his initial assault pushed her back across the stone floor, while spectator murmurs filled the room. Covering her footing with a confident grin, she teased that his innocent appearance had led her to lower her guard, acknowledging that his strength was indeed worthy of his lineage. Chuckling at her own oversight, the princess corrected her posture and vowed not to hold back any longer, realizing she had severely misjudged the young noble's capabilities. Unleashing a swift sequence of blade strikes, she closed the distance, forcing him to sharply focus his gaze to read every incoming arc. She darted around him seamlessly, launching a relentless barrage from the right, left, and below, leaving him hard-pressed to parry the rapidly shifting angles of her onslaught. Narrowly parries her fierce dual-blade assault, but realization dawns that swordplay alone won't suffice. Seizing a split second of opening, he channels spellcraft directly at her face, unleashing a blinding burst of light that forces the princess to wince and shield her eyes. Driven back by the glare, Princess Alexia swiftly resets her posture before launching a powerful follow-up strike. The two combatants leap back to create distance, sliding across the arena floor as they reassess one another. Rather than showing frustration, the young prodigy chuckles softly at the intensity of their clash. Across from him, Princess Alexia bursts into bright, joyful laughter, thoroughly enjoying the thrill of the duel. Observing her cheerful expression, he points out how much fun she seems to be having. She beams delightedly in response, exclaiming that a thrilling match against a skilled opponent like him could never be boring. Acknowledging his strength, she notes that raw fencing alone will not secure her victory. Channeling her mana, she activates a wind magic enchantment, causing swirling currents of air to wrap around her twin blades. Wind gusts wildly around her as the elemental aura coats her weapons in razor-sharp air currents. Facing her heightened magical power, he sets his posture and prepares himself for the imminent onslaught. Standing in the arena with dual blades blazing with aura, Princess Alexia readied her dual enchantment technique. The young prodigy immediately realized the anomaly, astonished that she could channel enchantment magic across two weapons simultaneously. Unleashing their full power, she combined her dual swords into a fierce Gale Sister attack, while he charged forward head-on, summoning his potent Takamikazuchi strike to meet her head-on. Clash of their immense magic triggered a blinding explosion that echoed across the training grounds, leaving the watching nobles stunned by the sheer force of the impact. Before the deadly clash could claim either combatant, the captain stepped between them, forcing both youngsters to halt their high-tier magical strikes. As the smoke slowly cleared over the scorched stone floor, the captain sternly reminded them that he had specifically forbidden the use of such potentially lethal magic during a practice spar. Sheer scale of their powers left everyone reflecting on whether the duel had pushed far beyond safe boundaries. Following the intense match, the gathering relocated to the grand hall of the royal palace, where the adults convened to discuss the duel's implications. Commending the young prodigy's extraordinary talent, the king praised Marquis Ron Walker for raising such an exceptional child, though the Marquis humbly noted that his son still had much room to grow. Guided out into the sunlit palace corridor, he found himself dragged along by Princess Alexia, who beamed warmly as she declared that with strength like his, the borderland realm would remain secure. Leading him on a personal tour of the palace grounds, she burst with energetic enthusiasm about his incredible final technique, brushing off his concern over her brief, fainting spell and inviting him to drop formal titles. Closing the distance between them, she leaned in close to press him for details about his secret moves, eagerly demanding another match whenever the opportunity arose. Their lively chat was interrupted by Helendine Largaris, a poised noble student council member who chided the princess for abandoning her official duties early. Ignoring her aide's scolding, the princess enthusiastically pulled the young boy into a smothering hug against her chest, explaining that meeting him was worth skipping her duties. Introduced formally as Reavelt Runwalker of the distinguished Runwalker house, he received a polite greeting from Helendine, who introduced herself as the eldest daughter of the ducal house of Largaris and Alexia's personal aide. As the young boy struggled for air in the princess's firm embrace, Helendine exasperatedly reminded Alexia that suffocating people with overbearing affection was hardly appropriate behavior. As he found himself squished against the princess's bosom, he wondered about the odd nickname she had earned for hugging young children, while Helendine offered a weary apology for Alexia's sudden emotional outburst. Princess Alexia explained how her intention to challenge the Marquis had unexpectedly resulted in a duel with the young boy instead, prompting Helendine to ask if this was her idea of an apology. Cheerful despite her defeat, the princess cheerfully admitted that the young boy had completely wiped the floor with her in battle. Stunned by the confession, Helendine asked if the princess had truly held nothing back, only to receive a calm and direct confirmation. The playful wink, Alexia boldly declared that because of his victory, she would henceforth consider herself his official partner. Both the boy and Helendine could only stare in shock, completely caught off guard by her sudden announcement. Helendine then revealed the secret rule behind the declaration. Princess Alexia had publicly vowed to marry any younger male capable of besting her in combat. Realization struck the young boy with sudden dread as he digested the implications of his victory over her. He asked if his father was aware of this custom. Helendine confirmed that Lord Zeke had even received official royal sanction after meeting the criteria. Suddenly recalled his father's enthusiastic encouragement before the duel, realizing with frustration that he had been completely set up from the start. Leaning close, with a radiant smile, Alexia softly expressed how much she was looking forward to their future together as husband and wife. As he nervously offered a weak response, shouting voices suddenly broke through the palace air, announcing that someone had finally tracked them down. A group of confident academy students strode forward, demanding that Princess Alexia step up to challenge them today. Princess turned around with an annoyed sigh, irritated that these persistent suitors had followed her all the way to this secluded spot. The challengers complained about her refusal to fight them. Alexia immediately recognized the distinctive Cardia Academy uniforms they were wearing. She bluntly informed the challenging students that they were simply too weak, adding with complete disdain that none of them were remotely cute, leaving the young boy stunned by her utterly superficial reasoning. Ignoring their utter disbelief, she wrapped an arm firmly around the young boy and proudly announced to the entire room that her husband had already been chosen, pointing directly to him. Realizing the dangerous situation he was suddenly thrust into, the young boy grimaced nervously, while the older academy students loudly protested, accusing her of fabricating a ridiculous story about losing to a mere child just to avoid fighting them. Standing her ground with unyielding composure, she insisted that it was no laughing matter, reconfirming that she had indeed suffered a genuine defeat against him. Forced to accept her statement, the lead challenger drew his blade and redirected his anger toward the young boy, declaring that if he defeated the child, the princess's hand in marriage would belong to him instead. Turning to her supposed fiancé with pleading eyes, she begged him to step in, prompting the young boy to give a resigned sigh and reluctantly accept the duel. Overjoyed by his agreement, she wrapped her arms around him with a beaming smile, declaring her affection and offering to help him change into combat attire, though he quickly insisted he could manage on his own. Holding his simple training staff, the young boy lamented his tragic luck and cursed his unfortunate fate before stepping out to face the impatient challengers who mockingly asked if he had been saying his final farewells. The princess cheered passionately for him from the sidelines. The challenger activated a dark, ominous glow along his weapon, sparking widespread alarm among the onlookers who instantly recognized the dangerous cursed sword. Sensing a sudden, sinister surge of energy, the young boy widened his eyes in shock as his opponent's expression twisted into an unhinged, murderous fury, utterly consumed by a dark urge to kill. Murderous frenzy consumed the opponent as dark aura poured around him, his frantic screams filling the arena. The young prodigy narrowed his eyes in caution, instantly sensing that something unnatural was twisting his attacker's body and mind. Without warning, the corrupt student lunged forward with explosive swiftness, bringing his blade down in a violent overhead arc. The young noble reacted in a split second, raising his staff to block the ferocious blow as a shockwave burst between them. Steel scraped loudly against his weapon as he absorbed the impact, holding his stance unwavering against the immense strength pushing against him. Observing the attacker's formidable speed and raw force, he realized this opponent rivaled even Princess Alexia in combat power. He maintained his composure, analyzing every detail of the hostile aura surrounding the blade. Quickly deduced the truth behind the unnatural surge. The cursed sword was actively corrupting the wielder's arm, creeping up his flesh like a living parasite. On the sidelines, Princess Alexia cried out in alarm, warning him that direct engagement was far too dangerous. Recognizing the necessity of distance, he prepared his movements to keep the hostile sword at bay. Another ruthless strike cleaved through the air toward him, but he deftly parried the dark edge with his staff, absorbing the violent vibration. Stepping back to reevaluate the battleground, he discovered two more students stepping forward, both wielding identical cursed weapons, emitting ominous shadowy vapor. The royal princess offered to intervene and stop the duel. He firmly ordered her to stand back, determined to prevent her and Helen from coming to harm. Calling upon his small spirit companion, he gave the signal to initialize their joint technique, and the fairy answered without hesitation. Sparks of lightning began to crackle around the young boy as his mana surged dramatically, drawing astonished gazes from the onlookers. Reflecting another incoming blade, he calculated that coordinating seamlessly with the thunder spirit would allow him to cast magic far above his normal threshold. While the corrupted attackers charged him in a frantic frenzy, he danced between their strikes, focusing entirely on buying the critical seconds required to charge high-rank magic. Flashing weapons repeatedly against his aggressors, he gritted his teeth under the heavy barrage, holding out just a moment longer while the spirit gathered electrical energy above. He held his position as a brilliant spark of magical power condensed at the tip of his weapon, signaling that the preparation was complete. Hikarin announced that the energy was fully charged. He gave a resolute shout, ready to unleash their joint attack, activating body enhancement alongside a dark vortex weapon enchantment. He surged forward with explosive velocity. The thunderous cry, he drove his weapon forward, executing the high-tier black thunder spear technique. Colossal wave of dark lightning exploded across the training grounds, shattering the pavement and engulfing the entire corridor in blinding light. The smoke began to drift away. The young princesses watched in stunned awe from behind the barrier. Across the ruined stone floor, all three corrupted attackers lay completely defeated and unconscious, their dark aura extinguished. Lowering his spear, he exhaled deeply, quietly acknowledging that the dangerous ordeal was finally over. Exhausted from channeling such immense power, the tiny thunder spirit dissolved into a soft cloud of vapor. Bursting with excitement, Alexia rushed forward and threw her arms around him, cheering ecstatically for his incredible triumph. Pressed tightly against her chest, he gasped for air, muffled by her suffocating embrace. While the lively girls continued to celebrate in the open hallway, a figure wrapped in a white hooded cloak observed them silently from the shadows of a nearby doorway. Deep within the haze of lingering sleep, a gentle voice repeatedly called out Ray's name, pulling him back toward consciousness. As he slowly opened his eyes, he was met with the close-up face of Princess Alexia, hummed contentedly right beside him. Startled out of his slumber, Ray let out a startled scream and scrambled back, demanding to know why she was in his room. Alexia lightly brushed off his shock, teasingly calling it a simple morning wake-up kiss, while pointing out that it was actually her own bedroom. Recalling the intense duel with the cursed sword wielders, Ray realized he had collapsed immediately after. Alexia explained that his sudden loss of consciousness was merely due to total mana exhaustion. Confused by the unfamiliar setting, he questioned again why he was sleeping in the princess's room. Alexia chided him for speaking so formally, encouraging him to drop the stiffness he had displayed moments before. She patted his head affectionately, finding his attempts to act mature completely endearing, and explained that he was resting there simply because she had requested it. Leaning in close with a playful smirk, she began to whisper something slyly into his ear. The mischievous look in her eyes, she teased that while he was fast asleep, she had taken the liberty of doing all sorts of unspeakable things to him. Panic surged through Ray as his inner thoughts spiraled, terrified that he had somehow lost his innocence at the tender age of 8. Interrupting the chaotic moment, Winton and Helen entered the bedchamber, relieved to see that Ray had finally awakened. Helen admitted her deep concern for him, explaining that anyone would be worried after watching a young boy single-handedly take down 3 dangerous cursed sword wielders. Winton added that Helen had even stayed by his side all night. Eager to move past the awkwardness, Ray inquired about the nature of those weapons, prompting Winton to offer a detailed explanation. Winton explained that curse swords are weapons imbued with magical power by highly skilled blacksmiths, crafted specifically to amplify the natural abilities of their wielders. Though uncommon, a fair number of them remain in circulation. Alexia chimed in to mention that her own twin blades were cursed swords as well, though Ray noted to himself that they bore no resemblance to the sinister weapons used by their attackers. He listened intently as Winton detailed how cursed swords vary depending on the monster parts and ores used to craft them, warning that while powerful in skilled hands, an unfit wielder risks being utterly consumed by the weapon's magic. Continuing his explanation while seated nearby, Winton noted that the cursed weapons wielded by their attackers were imbued with immensely formidable magic. Princess Alexia added that acquiring such dangerous arms is strictly restricted, leaving Ray to ponder how their dangerous enemies managed to obtain them in the first place. Turning directly to the recovering boy, she expressed deep regret for pushing him beyond his limits, though he stammered in polite embarrassment, assuring her that she had done nothing wrong. Watching their exchange from across the room, Winton remarked with a dry smile on how remarkably close the two had grown in such a brief time. Leaning in closer with a playful grin, he teased the younger boy about officially becoming the princess's chosen partner, flustering him completely. Their light-hearted banter was suddenly cut short as a maid opened the door to announce that Lady Shixal had arrived and requested everyone's presence in the conference room. Shocked by the news, Winton shouted in utter disbelief upon hearing that the headmaster herself had come, while Alexia wondered aloud what could have prompted her unexpected visit. Moments later, they stepped into the meeting hall, where an imposing female silhouette awaited them at the end of the corridor. As they entered, Winton quietly urged Ray to keep his guard up around the headmaster, calling her an old hag, only for a sharp, authoritative hand to heavy-handedly clamp down on his shoulder from behind. Revealing herself with a sharp, terrifying smile, Headmaster Shixal greeted Winton warmly yet threateningly, addressing him as Little Zeke and noting how much he had grown. Trembling and drenched in cold sweat under her intimidating gaze, Winton conceded to her sharp mockings, while Ray stood nearby in awe of her overwhelming presence. Turning to the group, Shixal casually mentioned receiving a letter from King Raymond regarding the trouble caused by his students, leaving Ray bewildered by her familiarity in addressing the monarch by his first name. Recognizing her legendary standing, Ray recalled that she is the prestigious headmaster of Cardia Academy, known throughout the land as the revered sword saint and undisputed strongest fighter in the kingdom. Confirming his thoughts, She explained that she also serves as the royal family's personal sword instructor and has known King Raymond since his early youth. She reminisced quietly, remembering a time when His Majesty was nothing more than an infant. Across the room, the king sneezed abruptly, while Ray marveled at the immense longevity of the elven race, wondering just how many centuries she had lived. Turning her attention directly to the young noble, she inquired if he was indeed the boy who had fended off the cursed swords. Ray stepped forward respectfully, confirming his identity as Revolt Runwalker. Princess Alexia piped up enthusiastically, boasting to Headmaster Sylphid Shixal about how Ray had defeated her in their duel and proved to be exceptionally strong. Sylphid smiled warmly at the boy, introducing herself and inviting him to address her casually. Ray cheerfully extended a hand to greet her properly, but in a sudden flash of movement, Sylphid seized his hand and flipped him effortlessly into the air, leaving him utterly bewildered. Tumbling head over heels in midair, he immediately recognized the danger as gravity threatened to slam him onto the floor. It dropped directly on his head without warning. The boy reacted instantly, adjusting his center of gravity to land gracefully and break his fall. Sylphid observed his sharp reflexes with calm amusement. Observing his recovery, she acknowledged his impressive potential, noting that such skill was only fitting for someone capable of defeating Alexia. Reaching down toward the startled boy once more, she offered a proper greeting as if nothing had happened. Still rattled by the unexpected test, he hesitantly shook her hand. Standing tall with absolute authority, she composed herself and announced that it was time to proceed with the official debrief. As the Grand Council begins to assemble, Lord Zeke invites the young boy to sit closer, but Ray politely declines, preferring to keep a thoughtful distance. Addressing the Prime Minister following Headmaster Shixal's arrival, the official confirms that the students involved in yesterday's cursed sword attack were all high-ranking noble sons. Continuing the briefing, he explains that although royal guards remain stationed at each noble estate, none of the afflicted boys have regained consciousness. King Raymond ponders the mystery, pointing out that even the parents had no idea how young students could come into possession of such dark artifacts. Master Shixal firmly asserts that the blades did not originate within her academy, prompting the council to speculate whether a merchant or an outside conspirator supplied them. Sharp gaze narrows as she considers the sinister possibility that someone deliberately handed the cursed weapons to the boys, while Ray listens intently. Before they can coordinate a joint investigation, the chamber doors burst open as an arrogant noble named Gultiz boldly interrupts the private proceedings. Demanding to know the meaning of this intrusion, Raymond confronts Gultiz, who smirks broadly while boasting that interesting rumors have reached his ears. Leaning over quietly, Princess Alexia whispers to ask about the newcomer, prompting Winton to identify the intruder as Gultiz, King Raymond's younger brother. Gultiz openly questions the palace assault, demanding confirmation about students wielding cursed swords inside the royal compound, which the council grimly acknowledges. Seizing the opportunity to undermine the monarch, Gultiz harshly criticizes the palace guard's laxity, callously pointing out that the king's own daughter was endangered. The condescending smirk, he openly challenges Raymond's capability to defend the kingdom, drawing a cold, sharp glare from the monarch. Escalating his provocation, Gultiz demands that Raymond take responsibility by stepping down from the throne, reaching for the hilt of his weapon. As he begins to draw his blade, Headmaster Shixal moves with lightning speed, stepping directly between the aggressor and the sovereign while Ray looks on in shock. A display of absolute mastery. She presses the tip of her steel against Gultiz's cheek, issuing a stern warning before he can take another step. She coldly lowered her blade, remarking with slight disdain to the king that she had simply brushed away a poisonous insect. Sweat dripped down Gultiz's trembling face as the silent hooded figure behind him reinforced the overwhelming pressure, forcing him to stand down. Gritting his teeth, the arrogant noble declared he would drop the matter for today, though he sneered that he would never truly acknowledge Raymond as his monarch. Observing the bitter departure from his seat, Ray quietly reflected on how exhausting and treacherous the burden of royalty truly was. As Gultiz stormed out of the hall, his dark, shadowed scowl suddenly caught Ray's eye, sparking a sharp jolt of suspicion in the boy. Breaking the heavy tension, King Raymond offered a gentle apology for the disruption, before turning toward Ray to ask if it was almost time for a scheduled event. Princess Alexia and Helendine tilted their heads in unison, repeating the mention of time with sudden curiosity. Later in the preparation room, Alexia marveled at how busy Ray was, teased him about his upcoming mock battle with Knight Commander Hendricks and others, and probed into how such a match came to be, while Helendine listened silently. And asked if he believed he could win against such formidable opponents. Ray admitted he honestly didn't know, but pledged to fight with everything he had. Alexia smiled brightly and expressed her absolute confidence in him, assuring the young warrior that she wasn't worried in the slightest. Knock at the door interrupted them, prompting Helendine to exasperatedly address the princess, as Ray confirmed he had finished changing into his combat gear. The young noble was informed that it was time, so the girls took their leave toward the audience stands while wishing him the best of luck. Stepping into the arena hallway, Ray was greeted by Headmaster Shixal, standing alongside his brother Winton. Shixal explained that she wished to observe the intriguing mock battle before returning to the academy, ignoring Winton's annoyed inner grumblings, telling her to go home. Observing the weapon in his hands, she noted his choice of a spear, to which he affirmed that while he could wield a sword, the polearm felt the most natural. Listened quietly as Headmaster Shixal chuckled, remarking how closely he resembled Zeke during his student days, a comparison Winton readily agreed with. Internally, the young noble could not help but acknowledge the truth in their words, grimacing slightly at the absurd system titles that continued to accumulate quietly in the background. She strode forward down the corridor. The headmaster mentioned that she personally instructed Princess Alexia in swordsmanship, admitting her genuine surprise upon learning that the princess had been defeated in a duel. Turning back with a sharp, expectant smile, she expressed her eager anticipation to witness firsthand the true martial strength he had displayed against her royal pupil. Winton chimed in with a playful smirk, urging his younger brother to do his utmost for the sake of their precious princess, prompting the boy to plead for an end to the light-hearted ribbing. Headmaster joined in on the banter by playfully questioning the nature of his relationship with Alexia, leaving him flustered. Turning serious, Winton placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, reminding him that the opposing knights were underestimating his talents and urging him to show them no mercy. Accepting the challenge without hesitation, the young warriors stepped out onto the expansive, sunlit arena grounds where ranks of armored knights stood waiting. High above in the spectator balconies, Shixal and Winton observed from a distance as he prepared for the encounter. Meanwhile, high above the arena floor, an enigmatic hooded figure stood in the deep shadows of the archways, quietly observing the gathering below. Grasping his spear firmly and setting his stance, the young combatant prepared himself as the loud announcement formally declared the commencement of the mock battle. Stepping out into the massive, sunlit arena, Revelt stood alone against an army of spectating soldiers lining the stands. His opponent locked eyes with him, wearing an arrogant, smirking expression, while Revelt remained utterly calm and focused. High above in the VIP balconies, noble spectators and dignitaries watched the standoff unfold with keen interest. Knight Captain taunted the young boy, expressing mock surprise that he hadn't run away from the massive crowd gathered for a simple battle. Revelt casually questioned why so many had gathered, prompting his opponent to explain that he was providing entertainment for the restless soldiers, including Revelt's own family in the stands. Commander gestured toward the noble box, casually mentioning that he had taken the liberty of inviting Revelt's family to watch. Claimed he invited them so they could witness their son's supposed heroic figure in action. Observing his family's worried faces, Revelt saw right through the commander's sick plan to humiliate him and break his spirit in front of those he loved. Standing alone in the center of the arena, the young boy listened as the commander feigned concern about showing the family their precious son getting hurt. Revelt promptly dismissed the commander's fake worry, asserting firmly that he had no intention of allowing such a sight to happen. Turned the tables, advising the commander to worry about his own reputation and status as Knight Division leader instead. The sharp smirk, the young boy warned that the commander might end up with a brand new title, the commander who lost to an 8-year-old. Seeing his opponent's composure crack into anger, Revelt noted inwardly that the man's friendly facade had finally dropped. The announcer barked over the roaring arena, declaring the start of the mock battle, pitting 100 soldiers against the 8-year-old son of the Marquis. Among the crowd, rumors spread as spectators questioned the truth of the challenge, whispering that the young lord had thrown a tantrum to force this impossible match. Glibly pointed out that the knight commander himself had proposed a duel, But the arena speaker quickly reframed the situation, declaring that the kingdom's military honor was on the line against such arrogance. As laughter echoed across the stands, the announcer formally declared the start of the mock battle, openly mocking the boys' odds before the assembled crowd. Hostile shouts erupted from the spectators, mostly loyal guards under the commander's influence, while the young royal companions looked on with rising anger. Unable to contain her fury, Princess Alexia leapt to her feet, roaring at the arena to shut their mouths and reminding them that they knew nothing of his true potential. Crossing her arms as she sat back down, Alexia huffed in satisfaction while Helendine dryly noted that he now had no excuse to lose, prompting the herald to commence the match. Rules were laid out plainly. Victory would be determined once one side could no longer fight, with magic fully permitted in the clash. Approaching with a sinister smirk, Commander Hendricks whispered a cold threat, hoping the boy would not hold a grudge if a fatal accident occurred on the sands. The signal given to begin, the young warrior braced himself as a wave of armed men charged forward, activating his body enhancement magic in a flash. He ducked seamlessly beneath incoming spears and began striking down the frontline ranks. Swift, blunt blows sent soldiers tumbling backwards in pain, their formation instantly thrown into disarray. Seeing his men falter, Commander Hendricks barked furious orders, commanding them to ignore the sting and press the assault. He effortlessly danced around their heavy strikes, leaving Princess Alexia to wonder why he was holding back rather than unleashing his devastating power. Assessing the situation internally, he realized that while the soldiers were weak, fighting 100 at full force risked accidentally killing them, unlike his past battles against monsters. As he weighed the dilemma, the small thunder spirit floating nearby offered words of encouragement, reminding him of his incredible strength. Inspired by her faith, a tactical solution crystallized in his mind. Rather than overwhelming them with deadly force, he simply needed to break their spirit to fight. He moved like a flash of light, weaving past the front rank of armored soldiers before they could react. A startled guard cried out as the young warrior planted his boots and launched himself high into the air, soaring far above the surrounding ring of foes. Using the head of a helmeted soldier as a stepping stone, he propelled himself even higher into the open sky above the arena. Stretching out his free hand, bright magical crests materialized around him, illuminating the battlefield as he channeled his electrical power into a wide-area spell. Looking down upon the gathered army from high above, dozens of shining spell seals pointed directly toward the helpless formation below. With fierce determination blazing in his eyes, he unleashed his overwhelming technique. Lightning Spear, 100 shots. Beams of purple electrical energy burst outward, overwhelming the surrounding knights with blinding power. At the center of the spectacle, Helendine watched in shock as the young boy unleashed a wave of magic that swept across the courtyard. As the electric shock waves ripped through the ranks, soldiers cried out in pain and scrambled to escape the sudden onslaught. Ray stood firm, his eyes glowing as he channeled the spirit's thunderous power directly against his foes. Having neutralized the surrounding squad, he turned his focus toward the remaining knight commander standing before him. Drawing his practice blade, he calmly instructed his opponent to prepare his weapon, stating that he had no desire to fight a defenseless enemy. Observing from the balcony, Princess Alexia called out his name in mild relief, while Helendine merely smirked with quiet confidence in the boy's abilities. Back on the arena floor, the boy pointed out that all the other soldiers had already been rendered immobile. Gritting his teeth in frustration, the commander realized he was the last man standing against a mere child. Refusing to be humiliated, the commander lunged forward, warning the child not to get overly confident. The young warrior swiftly deflected the fierce strike, matching the commander's blow with flawless precision. With agile movements, he slipped past his opponent's guard, delivering a rapid sequence of wooden sword strikes that bypassed the knight's heavy armor and struck true. Offering his opponent one final chance, he casually asked if the commander would surrender. The proud knight stubbornly spat back that he would never yield, charging once more only to be effortlessly dodged. Unnerved by the child's unnatural composure and overwhelming speed, the commander desperately swung his blade. Yet every strike was met with a crisp counter-strategy, leaving the knight completely exposed. Delivering a decisive blow directly to the commander's helmet, he sent the armored man crashing hard to the ground, ending the match in an instant. Silence fell over the courtyard as the fallen commander stared up in utter disbelief at the tiny warrior standing victorious over him. Across the vast open field, bodies of defeated knights lay scattered everywhere, leaving the young boy as the sole figure standing in the middle of the grounds. Spectators in the courtyard erupted in shock and disbelief, murmuring among themselves about how a mere kid could single-handedly defeat Commander Hendrix and an entire unit. On the balcony, Lady Elizabeth expressed her gratitude that the ordeal had ended safely, while Marco admitted without just how surprisingly strong his younger brother truly was. It brought the conflict to a safe conclusion, letting out a soft breath of relief alongside his royal companion. On the balcony, Headmaster Shixal acknowledged that the boy possessed remarkable room for growth, while Alexia hurried over to call out to him with bright excitement. Surprised by the sudden approach of Lady Alexia and Helendine, he turned in shock to face them. Before he could react, Princess Alexia closed the distance dramatically, placing her hands on his shoulders and leaning in extremely close. With a radiant smile, she praised his extraordinary display of strength, leaving him completely flustered. Helendine chided the princess for acting so boldly in public, but Alexia simply dismissed the concern with a beaming grin. Meanwhile, high above in the spectator area, a hooded observer stepped forward to shield the king's view as a mere precaution. High in the VIP box, the atmosphere grew tense following the duel's conclusion. King Raymond cursed under his breath, bitterly fuming over Hendrix's sudden defeat. The throne sat empty in the light, symbolizing the collapse of their immediate battle plan. In a fit of rage, the royal prince slammed his hand onto the armrest of his seat. His advisor berated the fallen knight commander for his miserable failure before the entire audience. The ruler admitted he had never anticipated the young prodigy would possess such overwhelming strength. The advisor addressed Prince Gultaz. The angry prince snapped back, demanding he refrain from using that name while trying to decide their next move. The hooded operative looked on silently as the prince raged against his status as a mere figurehead, while his advisor urged him to keep a low profile for the time being. He drummed his fingers nervously against the table, realizing that their recent failure risked raising the suspicions of King Raymond himself. Turning to the hooded operative standing before him, the prince sought confirmation that the empire would indeed crown him king if he secured the requested territory. The mysterious figure gave a polite nod and readily agreed to the terms. The operative assured him that experiments on the magic swords were proceeding smoothly, promising that within a few years, mass-produced weapons would assemble the strongest army under his command. Delighted by the prospect, the prince burst into hearty laughter, eagerly anticipating the day he would see the bitter defeat written across Raymond's face. Dismissing the operative to proceed with the plan, the prince watched as the cloak-clad figure bowed and took their leave. Once alone, the hooded observer privately mused on the prince's stupidity, marveling at how foolish it was to use Hendrix to cause such an obvious scene. Still, the mock battle had served its purpose by testing the capabilities of the magic sword in real combat. Adjusting his hood, the operative calculated that refining the magic sword's design would allow them to create soldiers capable of rivaling even the young prodigy. The sinister resolve, he pledged to secure that territory quickly and present it to his true master. As the group walked down the stone corridor, a sudden question caught the young boy completely off guard, leaving him stammering in disbelief. Master Shixal repeated her proposition plainly, asking whether he would remain in the royal capital even after tomorrow's birthday celebration concluded. Princess Alexia immediately beamed with excitement, clasping her hands together at the thought of him staying in the capital. Her enthusiasm was quickly tempered as the adults reminded her not to get ahead of herself, clarifying that it was merely an initial offer. Sword Saint explained that having witnessed his duel with the knight commander earlier, she recognized his extraordinary talent and wished to personally take him on as a disciple. Alexia rejoiced at the prospect of training alongside him under the headmaster, while he cautiously inquired how long such an arrangement would last. Shixal delivered her term without hesitation, stating that he would remain residing in the royal capital until his eventual graduation from Cardia Academy. Sheer scale of the proposal left the young boy utterly, speechlessly wide-eyed. Doing the math in his head, he realized that with 4 years remaining until enrollment and another 4 years of schooling, he would be committing to 8 full years away from home. As he stammered out the daunting time frame, the adults explained that a very specific reason existed for this plan, directly tied to his unusual status and titles. Observing his status, they noted that impending continental conflicts were inevitable, and someone possessing such exceptional abilities should not remain confined to a quiet frontier region. They reasoned that to survive the coming wars, receiving direct instruction from the Sword Saint immediately was far superior to waiting idle until academy enrollment. Absorbing the weight of their words, the young boy stared back attentively as Headmaster Shiksao awaited his response. Breaking the tension, Princess Alexia leaned in eagerly to look at his status sheet, while the king lightheartedly teased them to show his status to his future bride. He displayed his updated status window, revealing extraordinary physical and magical stats along with a formidable array of titles at 8 years old. He examined the status screen, noting the title regarding future hardships as if divine guidance were urging him to prepare. Headmaster Shiksao observed the readout, confident that he would navigate whatever trials lay ahead. Turning toward the young princess, the headmaster suggested that there was a vital question left to ask her. He admitted that, just as his father warned, intense hardship would surely follow him from this moment onward, potentially causing trouble for anyone at his side. Looking straight at Alexia, he asked if she truly wished to remain his partner, even after knowing the heavy path ahead. She met his serious tone with a confident smirk, dismissing the idea that such troubles could ever scare her off. Leaning in close and wrapping her arm affectionately around him, the princess declared her resolve to spend her life with her future husband, promising to follow him no matter what. His expression softened at her unwavering devotion, touched by her sudden and earnest embrace. Watching the pair, Headmaster Shiksao chuckled gently, noting how the boy simply wished not to drag those he cared about into his own turbulent fate. Striking a proud pose, Alexia assured him that she would grow stronger alongside him, offering to be left behind only if she failed to keep pace. As the conversation drew to a close, the adults reminded him that there was no immediate pressure to decide whether to relocate to the royal capital right away. His father gently placed a hand on his shoulder, advising him to take all the time he needed to thoroughly consider his future options. Talk shifted toward upcoming social events, with mentions of Princess Marina's birthday party tomorrow, where he might meet other prospective young ladies. Listening to their playful teasing, he quietly resolved not to end up endlessly charming every girl he met like Zeke had. The day of the birthday party, little Philia ran out happily in a stunning new dress, showing off her outfit to her beloved older brother, while Chloe followed closely behind. Admiring her appearance, he praised the jade green dress, pointing out how perfectly it complemented the color of her eyes. He watched as the young girls excitedly discussed their fancy new attire, before his father opened the door to call out to Philia. Whirling in her elegant green dress, the young cat girl asked for his opinion, prompting him to warmly assure her that she looked as adorable as an angel. The quiet moment was interrupted when a maid arrived with an urgent message from the royal palace, requesting that both Zeke and Ray arrive early before the birthday party began. The maid explained that distinguished foreign visitors wished to meet them, prompting his father to agree and call for him to make ready. Before departing, he crouched down to bid farewell to the children, gently teasing Philia while promising they would see each other again soon. As they walked through the grand corridors of the royal castle, he pondered who their unexpected visitors might be, learning from his father that envoys from the Beastkin nation of Warbest had arrived. Warbest, a neighboring nation where 70% of the populace were Beastkin, shared a strong alliance with the Nanol Kingdom. His father elaborated on the close ties between the two realms, mentioning how the Beast King visited the kingdom multiple times a year with his family. Led toward the reception room by attendant, he considered that this would mark his very first time meeting people from a foreign realm. He hoped the visitors would be friendly, given how frequently their families exchanged visits. Approaching the grand doors, he overheard raised voices inside, recognizing Princess Alexia arguing heatedly with an unfamiliar voice. Standing outside the threshold, both he and his father paused as they listened to the argument unfolding within. Catching snippets of the conversation through the thick wooden doors, he realized the two inside were locked in a sharp dispute. Pushing the door open, he gasped as his eyes locked onto a young Beast King girl with cat ears standing atop a table in a striking posture. The room fell silent as everyone turned toward the door, caught by surprise by his sudden entrance. Barely had time to react before the Beast King girl swung her open palm, landing a sharp slap squarely across his cheek. The force of the sudden strike left his face stinging as his eyes widened in sheer shock. Following the harsh blow, she held her ground, her fierce eyes glaring intensely without a single trace of her. Accusations flared in the corridor as young Ferris stood aggressively in front of Ray, angrily accusing him of deceiving her older sister, Princess Alexia. When asked why she was taking such drastic action, she admitted with tears welling in her eyes that it was because her sister had been wearing such a radiant, happy expression around him. Princess Alexia pleaded with the girl to calm down and listen, but the Beast King youth lashed out, declaring that her sister had never shown such a joyous face to her before. As Alexia and Ray tried once more to soothe her temper, she shouted for her sister to stay out of the matter and suddenly delivered a sharp blow straight to Ray's face. Sudden strike sent him sprawling to the ground with a bloody nose, leaving him thoroughly bewildered as Alexia rushed to check on his condition. Outraged by the violence, Alexia firmly ordered her to apologize, but the fierce girl obstinately refused, calling him a runt as she stomped away. Watching her retreat, he took offense not to the physical pain, but to being called a runt when he simply had not reached his growth spurt yet. Comforting him as he sat on the floor, the princess reassured him that a minor injury like a bloody nose would heal in no time. Afterward, Zeke chuckled heartily at his son's misfortune, dismissing the boy's plea for intervention by noting that adults should not interfere in children's squabbles. He went on to explain that the fiery child was Ferris Warbest, the first princess of the Beastman nation of Warbest and a member of the formidable Silver Wolf tribe, currently serving as an envoy. Curious as to why a royal envoy would attack him out of nowhere, the boy sought an explanation, causing Alexia to hesitate awkwardly. With a bashful blush, the princess confessed that she and Ferris had previously promised to marry each other. Stunned by the unexpected revelation, he stared at her in complete disbelief, asking her to repeat her words. She clarified that in the land of Warbest, same-sex marriage is fully recognized, leaving the young noble utterly amazed by the cultural differences. It was further noted that Warbest values strength above all, allowing powerful women to practice polyandry and take multiple husbands, contrasting with the common practice of polygamy in nations like Nanal. Listen carefully as Alexia explained the special cultural norms of the Beastman nation. She reflected on a childhood promise made years ago with Princess Ferris, coming to understand why the situation had grown so complicated. Calling how they had promised to marry if Ferris could defeat her in battle, Alexia admitted she had long forgotten the childhood vow. But for Ferris, whose family treated the oath as absolute, seeing the person she cared for suddenly engaged to someone else was a bitter blow, a sentiment he found entirely understandable. Guilt weighed heavily on the young princess as she blamed herself for ignoring such a vital commitment. Seeing her distress, he gently reassured her that the fault did not lie on her shoulders alone. Agreeing to seek a peaceful resolution, they decided to consult the king directly, hoping a conversation with His Majesty might offer a way forward. Momentarily, the king prepared to introduce the distinguished visitor who had just arrived at the palace. Standing before them was Falcius Warbistano, the formidable king of the Beastman nation of Warbest, possessing an imposing aura and muscular build. Upon hearing the young boy introduce himself as Reavelt Runwalker, the fierce king narrowed his eyes in recognition. Suddenly, the massive ruler dropped to his knees, offering a formal and desperate apology. The sight stunned everyone present, leaving Ferris completely bewildered as to why her father was prostrating himself. When Ferris attempted to speak up, the king sharply silenced his daughter, expressing deep remorse for her foolish actions in laying a hand on the young noble. Driven by extreme Warbest customs, the Beast King prepared to sever his own right arm and offer his daughter's exile as atonement, horrifying the young boy, who frantically tried to stop the extreme gesture. Intervening just in time, Zeke caught the Beast King's hand before the blade could strike, urging everyone to calm down so they could talk things through rationally. Once order was restored, the host lightheartedly noted that Falcius remained as dramatic as ever, inviting him to formally introduce his accompanying family. Beast Monarch proudly presented his wife Ashley, his son Forgast, and his daughter Ferris to the gathered nobles. Seacart Runwalker returned the greeting with formal courtesy, while the young boy quietly observed how subdued Ferris had suddenly become compared to her earlier outbursts. Taking a serious posture, the Beast King turned directly to his daughter, sternly asking if she truly understood the gravity of the foolish mistake she had committed. Bellowed at his daughter, berating her for striking a noble's son and the fiancé of a princess. He made it fiercely clear that her reckless behavior was tantamount to severing their alliance. Silencing her feeble excuses, the Beast King thundered that if this had occurred between common citizens, it could have ended in exile or execution, and against an allied nation, it risked triggering outright war. Watching the formidable monarch rage with the wild visage of a true beast, the young boy quietly noted just how terrifying the king appeared when angered. Turning back toward the young boy, the monarch bowed deeply, asking if he could be forgiven in exchange for his own right arm and his daughter's exile, relaying that King Raymond had deferred the final decision entirely to the young noble. The young noble looked on in quiet astonishment as the heavy gravity of the offer hung over the room, while the young Beastkin girl stood nearby, completely humbled by her father's severe decree. Breaking the heavy silence, the young boy nonchalantly brought up his own recent action of punching the Beast King, pointing out that striking the ruler of an allied nation was surely a grave crime as well. Sudden revelation caused King Raymond to choke on his drink, turning to his fellow monarch to ask how they should handle such a predicament. King Raymond expressed concern that if word of these mutual strikes leaked out, it would cause massive political fallout, urging the Beast King to find a peaceful resolution. Dismissing the boy's blow as nothing worthy of concern, the Beast King assured him that simply forgiving his daughter would be more than enough to settle the matter. Relieved by the simple request, the young boy readily granted his forgiveness, prompting the Beast King to lightheartedly offer his arm once more in gratitude. Delighted by how smoothly things concluded, the Beast King praised the boy for his good nature and openly expressed a wish for him to join their family. Princess Alexia immediately interjected, declaring that such an arrangement was impossible because the young boy was destined to spend the rest of his life with her. Overhearing the mention of a foolish son, Prince Gultaz questioned if they were speaking of him, while the Beast King warmly admitted he wished the young boy could teach his own son a thing or two. Acknowledging the princess's intense feelings, the Beast King expressed complete understanding of her desire to forge a bond with someone possessing such remarkable strength at his age. Leaning in with a confident smile, the monarch formally proposed a betrothal to his daughter as the ultimate token of his gratitude. Sudden engagement proposal left both the young boy and the Beastkin girl utterly shocked, their eyes wide in disbelief at the unexpected decree. Shockwaves rippled through the grand hall as both children shrieked in unison at the sudden arrangement of their betrothal. Demanding answers, Ferris questioned her father about the sudden decision, asserting that in war-best tradition, the strong marry the strong, while adamantly refusing to wed someone she saw as inferior. Ray fired back, pointing out her desire for an older figure, which ignited a furious spat as Ferris repeatedly mocked his small stature, prompting him to indignantly claim his growth spurt was merely delayed. Princess Alexia stepped in to cool their tempers, though she could not resist teasing Ray about his current height and whether he would ever actually grow taller. Turning his frustration back on Ferris, Ray teased her for crying earlier, driving her into a flustered rage as she desperately denied throwing a tantrum. Their argument escalated further into childish bickering, neither side willing to back down. Before the childish feud could boil over completely, an authoritative hand came down firmly upon both of their heads, instantly pinning them to the floor. Silencing their squabble in a single instant, the Beast King sternly commanded both of them to cease their foolishness. King Raymond observed with a knowing smirk that bickering was simply a sign of closeness, causing both children to shout out in synchronized rejection. Sparks practically flew between the two youngsters as Alexia observed their fierce rivalry, doubting whether a pleasant conversation was even possible between them. Questioned further about her intense dislike for Ray, Ferris dramatically pointed a finger, declaring that he reeked of another female cat. Ray gasped in absolute shock at the accusation, while Alexia eyed him suspiciously, demanding to know what secret affairs he had been keeping. King Falcius clarified the matter, explaining that beasts and beastkin alike habitually mark the people or items they cherish with their distinct scent. Realization washed over Ray as he remembered Clona, the young feline beastkin maid who had affectionately clung to him before. Felt a sudden chill as Princess Alexia leaned in dangerously close, her eyes sparkling with intense curiosity as she asked if his personal maid, the girl who held his heart, would be attending the birthday celebration today. Nervously stammering a confirmation, Ray could only watch in apprehension as Alexia flashed a remarkably cheerful smile, expressing her eager desire to have a brief word with the young cat girl. Trying to keep the mood pleasant, the boy gently mentioned how important Clona was to him and expressed his hope that they would get along well when they met. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the royal estate, young Philia suddenly shivered with an overwhelming instinct, announcing to her mother Chloe that an indispensable battle awaited her. Chloe merely offered a warm, maternal smirk, calling it a woman's intuition and promising her daughter that she would understand the feeling once she grew older. Back in the reception room, Ray recoiled from Alexia's lingering, intimidating gaze, only to be ambushed by Prince Forgast, throwing an arm around his shoulders with light-hearted banter. Beastkin Prince boisterously welcomed him as a future brother-in-law, clearly amused by the mounting domestic tension surrounding the young noble. Alexia immediately pulled Ray close in a possessive embrace, warning Forgast not to underestimate him, and proposing a sparring match during their upcoming week-long visit to the Nanol Kingdom. Forgast eagerly insisted on being first in line to challenge him, while King Falcius nodded in agreement, eager to test the strength of the young prodigy himself. As Ray inwardly lamented his endless string of martial troubles, an attendant stepped inside to inform King Raymond that the banquet was about to begin. Acknowledging the attendant, King Raymond gestured for Ray to accompany him toward the main hall to kick off the festivities. King casually mentioned his plan to officially announce Ray and Alexia's engagement halfway through the party, leaving the boy completely stunned. Lord Zeke calmly gave his full approval to the monarch's proposed schedule without a moment's hesitation. King Falcius suddenly chimed in, adding that they should also announce the engagement between Ferris and Ray at the exact same moment, causing Ferris to clutch her dress in sheer shock. Refusing to accept the arrangement, Ferris stormed out of the room in tears, leaving Falcius to physically shove a bewildered Ray out the door to chase after her. He reluctantly agreed as his elder brothers urged him to act like a true man of the Runwalker house and pursue the fleeing Beastkin girl, reminding him strictly to return before the birthday celebration officially began. Meanwhile, soft footsteps crunched through the grass along a quiet outdoor path near the trees. Deep within the grove, Ferris stood alone in the shade of a large tree, her feline ears drooping slightly. Sighing softly, the young girl pondered her impulsive exit and lamented how the adults decided everything without her consent. She questioned why she had to be arranged to marry someone like him, wondering what her older sister could possibly see in such a boy, when sudden approaching footsteps interrupted her quiet thoughts. She turned around in confusion, only to find Prince Gulta's standing arrogance before her, flanked by his attendants. Calling out abruptly to the young Beastkin girl, an arrogant noble youth drew her attention. As Ferris turned in confusion, wondering what he could possibly want from her, the youth's followers immediately took offense at her lack of formal deference. She quietly wondered whether he was simply another noble guest attending the birthday celebration. The pompous follower loudly proclaimed his master's identity, Lord Popunpu, the son of Duke Purin. Popunpu himself smugly urged his attendant to remain calm. Fawning over his young master, the sycophantic attendant praised Popunpu's majestic qualities, while the young noble magnanimously announced that he would forgive such a minor transgression. Unmoved by his display of self-importance, she met his smug expression with a sharp, silent glare. Deciding to ignore the absurd group, she simply turned away, stating that she had somewhere else to be. Outraged by her dismissal, the slick-haired lackey lunged forward and aggressively grabbed her by the arm, demanding to know the reason for such insolence toward Lord Popunpu. She struggled against his tight grip, demanding to be released, but the arrogant follower refused to let go, insisting she acknowledge her place. Forcing her down toward the ground, the lackey harshly demanded that she immediately apologize to Lord Popunpu. Cowering beneath his overwhelming posture, Her heart raced as fear began to set in. Feigning restraint, Poponpu instructed his follower not to be so rough before offering a sinister bargain, declaring he would forgive her if she agreed to become his personal pet. The lackey enthusiastically praised the cruel idea, commanding the terrified girl to rejoice at the prospect of serving as a pet to a high noble. Overwhelmed by panic, her body froze in terror as the noble boys mocked her trembling frame, leaving her desperately wishing for someone to rescue her. Just as the situation seemed dire, Revolt stepped in, firmly grabbing the lackey's wrist to halt his aggression. The startled attendant turned angrily, demanding to know who dared interfere with Lord Poponpu's affairs. As the follower continued to boast about Poponpu's noble lineage, Revolt calmly cut him off, drawing attention back to the young girl they had mistreated. With absolute clarity, Revolt announced her true identity to the stunned nobles. Lady Ferris Warbest, first princess of the Beastman nation of Warbest and a vital ally to the kingdom, leveled a piercing glare at the trembling noble youth and his follower, demanding to know how they dared act so insolently toward the princess of Warbest. Shock drained the color from their faces as he calmly escorted the startled beastkin princess away. As they walked together, he glanced sideways at her, noticing her uncontrollable trembling. He pondered why someone so powerful, who had easily overwhelmed him in combat before, refrained from simply blasting the noble bullies away. Turning back briefly, he made his intentions absolute, declaring that he would report the incident directly to King Raymond and advising the offenders to prepare for severe consequences. Leaving the disgraced nobles cowering in fear within the palace grounds, he guided Ferris toward the safety of the interior corridors. Two walked side by side down the quiet, polished hallway in silence. Ferris kept her eyes lowered, her feline ears drooping as heavy thoughts weighed upon her. She murmured softly, pointing out that those nobles had only shown disrespect because they were unaware of her royal title, insisting they would face proper punishment. Yet, as memories of her previous aggressive encounter with Revolt flashed through her mind, an agonizing realization struck her, making her question if her own past actions had been any different from those bullies. Remembering how her reckless behavior had forced her own father, the Beast King, to bow his head in apology, she fell into deep self-reproach, deeming herself the absolute worst. Sensing her distress, Revolt stopped walking and gently offered to treat the arm where she had been grabbed, pulling her out of her dark reverie. Asking if the bruised spot hurt, he softly placed his hands over her wrist, channeling light, healing magic to soothe the injury. As he felt the intense, lingering tremors in her small hand, he realized just how deeply terrified she had truly been despite her royal standing and immense strength. He looked up and called her name. She flinched back suddenly, startled by his proximity. Flustered, she stammered an apology, explaining that she had simply been reminded of something painful from her past, leaving him astonished by her sudden humility. He gently asked if something had occurred while offering her space to remain silent, but she quietly looked down and revealed that the past event was not entirely unrelated to him. Listened carefully as the young beastkin guided him through the serene clearing, beckoning him to follow her toward a quiet spot away from the crowd. As they settled near the trees, she explained that the past incident involved Princess Alexia, catching him completely by surprise. Walking side by side, she promised that he would fully understand her admiration for Alexia once she shared the entire story. Memory shifted back 5 years prior, to a grand summit where the king of Nanol met with the ruler of Warbest to review their alliance. Every 5 years, both nations gathered for a major conference to discuss state affairs and renew their diplomatic treaties. She recalled how the week-long summit felt endlessly dull to the children, prompting Alexia and her peers to head off toward the training grounds. During those days, Alexia and Prince Forgast constantly sparred against each other, completely engrossed in their training. Left alone with no one to play with, the young princess wandered outside the castle walls on a whim, entirely unaware that mysterious hooded figures were watching her from the shadow. Little Princess Ferris wandered through the bustling marketplace, peering curiously over the fruit stalls. A friendly vendor offered her an apple, welcoming the new face, which she accepted with a polite thank you. She continued strolling down the crowded city streets, enjoying her secret adventure. Relishing her freedom after sneaking out of the castle, she realized the outside world was far more exciting, though she knew she would eventually have to return. Taking a wrong turn into a quiet back alley, she suddenly paused, realizing she was completely lost. Before she could turn back, rough hands seized her from behind, pulling her into the shadows as sinister hooded men surrounded her. Thugs chuckled menacingly, noting her noble attire and cute features before declaring their intent to sell her off into slavery. Panic seized her mind as the terrifying realization of her plight set in. Lead captor muzzled her mouth while remarking on the high value of a beastman noble, warning her not to struggle if she wanted to avoid getting hurt. As they prepared to haul her away, footsteps suddenly echoed through the narrow passage. Regretting her decision to leave the castle without her brother, she cried out silently for help. Her desperate wish was answered as a swift figure darted into the alley, drawing blades to engage the attackers. Princess Alexia charged forward with absolute determination, startling the young captive. The lightning-fast strike, Alexia cut down the lead kidnapper, freeing Ferris, who gasped in awe at her savior. She stood her ground valiantly as the young beastkin boy rushed over to protect his little sister, leaving the bewildered captors yelling in frustration at her unexpected interference. Whispering hurriedly among themselves, the criminals were suddenly struck with horror as they realized the child standing before them was the kingdom's first princess. Brandishing their swords, the attackers demanded both children yield quietly if they wanted to stay alive, but she met their crude threats with nothing less than pure disdain. Refusing to give in to such vile men, the brave royal leaped forward, her grand stance imprinting a heroic silhouette into young Ferris's memory. A flash, the thugs were completely subdued and left unconscious on the ground, leaving Ferris staring in absolute awe at her incredible older protector. Tears welled in her eyes as the little beastkin girl offered a tearful apology, admiringly calling her savior big sister. Pulling the child close into a warm embrace, the gentle princess reassured her that her safety was all that truly mattered. A single gesture of kindness forever sealed Ferris's boundless devotion while her brother observed the tender scene in complete relief. Ferris explained that ever since that terrifying encounter, she had developed a deep mistrust of men, feeling secure only around her father and brother. Listening attentively, Ray pondered how her strong-willed nature was forged through such terrifying trials, realizing how deeply those events had shaped her. Blushing softly, Ferris confessed that in her eyes, the princess appeared as an ethereal goddess, capturing her heart completely in that single moment. She added that when she inquired how the princess found her, Alexia casually shared that sneaking out into the city streets was something she did regularly. Realizing how passionately she had been gushing about her idol, Ferris flushed with embarrassment and quickly apologized for getting so carried away. She went on to explain her belief that Alexia had simply forgotten the sweet promise of marriage made between them long ago. Before leaving for her homeland at the end of the conference, Ferris had directly asked the princess what steps were required for them to be united forever. She recalled asking what conditions were required, assuming in her heart that marriage was a possibility, only to hear Alexia's response. Smiling cheerfully, the young princess had challenged her, declaring that if she wished to fight by her side, she would first have to become strong enough to defeat her. Overjoyed by the challenge, the young beastkin girl had eagerly agreed, proposing that if she won, Alexia would have to visit Warbest. Reflecting on that moment, she admitted to Ray that she had been so caught up in her excitement that she failed to realize Alexia had merely assumed she wanted to become her battle companion. Calling her own foolishness laughable, tears began to well in her eyes as she acknowledged the entire misunderstanding was hers alone. As tears spilled onto the ground, Ray looked on with quiet concern before placing a hand down to cast a spell. Invoking earth magic, he created a solid earth wall that completely encased them, sealing off their surroundings. Reassuring the startled girl, he explained that no one outside could see or hear her inside the dome, offering to step out so she could weep freely. Leaving her to cry in private behind the protective barrier, he stood guard outside, allowing her to release her pent-up sorrow alone. Under the quiet shade of a large tree, Ray rested peacefully, a stark contrast to the violent outburst from earlier when Ferris had smashed a boulder in her frustration. Approaching him softly, she expressed her quiet gratitude and asked if he was feeling better. He dismissed her concern with a gentle nod, remarking that the rock was already weak and would have crumbled on its own. She gazed up at him, her eyes softening with a touch of tender embarrassment. Met her gaze in quiet wonder, Sensing the shift in her demeanor, bowing her head deeply in sincere apology, she admitted that her past anger was entirely a misunderstanding, though she felt guilty for striking him twice despite her mistake. He reassured her that everything was forgiven and that he no longer harbored any ill feelings toward her. A bright smile returned to her face as she thanked him for coming to her aid earlier, cheerfully inviting him to head back to the group while addressing him warmly by his name. Watching her walk ahead, he stood frozen in place, marveling at the fact that she had used his name when he was certain she detested him. Rejoining the others inside the academy hall, their arrival drew an abrupt turn from Alexia, who called out their names in surprise. Before Alexia could offer her regrets, the young beastkin girl stepped forward to offer reassurance, insisting that there was no need to apologize. The princess pressed on sorrowfully, acknowledging that she had broken her sacred promise and caused unnecessary pain. Beastkin child listened attentively, her quiet focus reflecting a deep sense of maturity. Looking down with a heavy heart, the older girl repeated her apology for failing to hold true to the vow she had made. The gentle look of understanding, the child accepted her apology, explaining that she now truly understood the feelings weighing on her heart. She gladly agreed to remain by Princess Alexia's side, admitting her own faults and offering a heartfelt apology for all the trouble she had caused. With tears of joy and relief in their eyes, the two young girls embraced tightly, completely putting their past misunderstanding behind them. Seeing how tightly Ferris was holding Alexia, Ray gently teased her about squeezing the princess too hard. Startled, Ferris quickly released her hold with a blushing apology, while Ray observed with a warm smile how wonderfully the two had managed to reconcile. Reminded that the main celebration was about to begin, Ray prepared to excuse himself. As Ferris waved goodbye to Ray, Alexia caught the unexpected familiar tone between them and questioned when they had grown so close. Glancing back at the crowded hall, Ray brushed off her curiosity with a light-hearted reply, leaving Alexia slightly baffled by his casual demeanor. Turning to the grand hall, Ray was greeted by a sudden wave of energetic enthusiasm as Philia ran out, calling out to him joyfully in front of the gathered guests. Apologizing for his late arrival, Ray formally presented his mother and younger sister to the royal guests, while Lady Aerislet and the princesses exchanged gracious formal greetings. Observing the dignified introductions, Ray's parents shared a quiet moment of satisfaction, deeply impressed by how effortlessly their son had built close ties with two royal highnesses. Slightly bowing before the royal visitors, little Philia introduced herself as Ray's younger sister, taking the noble women by complete surprise with her adorable charm. Unable to resist her overwhelming cuteness, Lady Aerislet and Princess Alexia immediately swooped in to gather the bewildered little girl into a smothering, affectionate hug. Meanwhile, Ferris leaned in close to whisper ominously to Alexia, declaring that she had detected the distinct scent of a vixen lingering on Ray. Her sharp gazes instantly settled on Clona, who stood nearby, quietly attending to her duties, unaware of the sudden intense scrutiny. Exuding an intimidating aura, Ferris and Alexia loomed over the young beastkin girl, zeroing in on her as the primary target of their suspicion. Feeling the sudden heavy tension in the air, Clona blinked in utter confusion, completely baffled as to why the two royal girls were glaring down at her. Cornering the young maid, Ferris bluntly confronted her about leaving her scent on Ray, demanding to know her name and her true intentions regarding him. As Alexia boldly declared her ambition to support Ray both as a woman and a warrior, Ferris countered with her own firm pledge, prompting the gathered group to turn their attention toward Clona for her answer. With absolute resolve in her big, expressive eyes, Clona declared her own unwavering commitment to stay by Lord Ray's side, wishing to support him not only as his dedicated handmaid, but also as a woman. Her unexpected declaration left the young lord completely flustered, having never heard such bold feelings expressed before. Princess Alexia admitted that while she did not fully grasp what being devoted to him as a woman entailed yet, she was willing to accept the feline girl's earnest resolve. Reaching out to clasp her hands tightly, the princess warmly proposed that they work together to support him, a gesture that the young maid enthusiastically embraced. Still reeling from the sudden turn of events, he breathed a quiet sigh of relief, genuinely glad that the princess had accepted her so graciously. Surrounded by his loving family and companions, the atmosphere brightened as everyone expressed their eager anticipation for the upcoming birthday celebration. Far from the joyful gathering, ominous metallic footsteps echoed ominously through a pitch-black corridor. Blood-dripping blade lay discarded amidst a gruesome scene of slaughtered guards, as a sinister figure cackled maniacally inside the dungeon depths before unlocking the heavy prison doors. Leaning with unbridled malice, Prince Gulta swore to brutally murder the boy who had humiliated him, throwing the iron gates open to release the dangerous captives. Step by step, two formidable, demonic prisoners emerged into the light, celebrating their sudden freedom while the young lord remained blissfully unaware of the dark storm gathering against him. The grand birthday party commenced with a formal herald announcing the presence of His Majesty King Raymond and His Majesty the Beast King Falcius. Princess Marina Nanol, taking center stage in a vibrant dress, addressed the assembled guests with bright gratitude, hoping everyone would enjoy celebrating her high society debut. Standing among the spectators, Lord Zeke noted Princess Marina's appearance, while Alexia and the rest of the young nobility observed the birthday girl. Turning toward their group, Ray suggested that they should go pay their formal respects shortly, but he noticed Ferris was lingering behind. Ferris and her companion immediately expressed their distaste, complaining that formal greetings were far too much of a drag to bother with. Agreeing wholeheartedly, the young beastkin opted to leave the formal duties to those better suited for them, happily retreating to the banquet spread instead. As they approached the food, Philia offered a plate of treats, while pointing out that Ray had a stray bit of food stuck to his face. Ray gently wiped the food from Philia's face to thank her, and then, noticing that Ferris also had something near her mouth, absent-mindedly reached out to wipe her cheek as well. Offering a polite smile, he considered it a simple, harmless gesture between friends. Ferris froze completely, her wide eyes locked onto him in absolute shock at the sudden intimacy. Sudden commotion erupted nearby as someone bumped into another guest, shouting in surprise and blurting out quick apologies. Distracted by the sudden outburst, Ray watched in bewilderment as Ferris abruptly stomped away, calling him an idiot under her breath. Rubbing the back of his head, he realized that treating a high-status princess like a child out of habit was probably quite disrespectful. Shortly after, Lord Zeke approached Ray to remind him that it was finally time for them to greet Princess Marina together. As they walked, Zeke quietly informed Ray that halfway through the party, an official announcement regarding Ray's engagement to Princess Alexia would be delivered to the entire room. He admitted his hesitation, worried that his title might ultimately put Princess Alexia in danger. Ferris snapped at him to stop moping and make up his mind, frustrated by his faint-hearted indecision. Philia chimed in with unwavering faith in her big sister's strength, declaring that Alexia promised she would grow stronger alongside Ray. Ferris insisted that if Alexia was going to get stronger, then he simply had to get stronger too. She argued that by pushing each other to overcome any hardship, the two of them would become truly invincible. The fierce glare, she warned him that if he ever made her big sister cry, she would personally beat him to a pulp. Ray thanked Princess Ferris warmly, his expression resolving with renewed clarity as he announced that he had made his decision. Aries called out for her brother to hurry up, prompting him to follow after the girls as they moved along the hallway. Watching him go, Ferris smiled softly to herself, satisfied with the impact of her words. Philia praised Ferris for doing a wonderful job encouraging him, and Ferris quietly agreed. Inside the grand hall, Princess Marina Nanol greeted Revelt cheerfully as she received birthday congratulations. King lavished praise on young Marina's lovely dress, though his overly doting enthusiasm left her exasperated. His Majesty then turned his affection toward First Prince Alberto, who remained cool and unbothered by his father's doting antics. When asked about Prince Alex, Alberto dismissively revealed that his brother had slipped away as soon as the opening ceremony concluded. Noticing the tension between Lady Alexia's brothers, Ray observed their departure just as an attendant informed Lord Zeke that it was almost time. He admitted his nervousness as the summons arrived for the grand announcement, knowing it was finally time to step forward. Calling the gathered crowd to attention, the king stepped up to declare joyous news to the whole hall. Presented Princess Alexia alongside young Revelt Runwalker, framing them as the central figures of this historic royal proclamation. Suddenly, a bloodied guard burst through the doors, interrupting the proceedings to deliver an urgent message to Royal Guard Commander Gain. Massive prison break had just occurred at the military headquarters, leaving guards fallen in its wake as criminals poured out from the underground cell block. Situation grew direr by the second. Roughly 100 dangerous convicts had escaped, nearly 20 armed with cursed swords, including notorious monsters like the Ripper Fiend and the Vampire from the lowest depths. The guards scrambled to initiate an immediate evacuation. Confusion and terror swept through the gathering of nobles, leaving young Ray to watch the sudden chaos unfold around. Guards shouted urgently, ushering the royal family and guests down an emergency escape passage beneath the castle as chaos erupted above. Princess Alexia looked up at her father nervously, but King Raymond offered a calm, reassuring word, explaining that the underground corridor was meant for times of crisis. He continued moving as the king's advisors debated how so many notorious prisoners could have escaped simultaneously, noting that the locations of the high-profile fugitives were already pinpointed. Outside the fortress walls, Merlin and the Academy's magic division fought to keep the primary threats at bay, prompting Ray to inquire about the true identities of the infamous escapees. Listened as the details were revealed about Gone Woods, the Ripper Fiend, and Valentina Hyperson, the Vampire, two heinous serial killers who had been locked in the lowest level of the dungeon for decades before suddenly escaping. Passing a small enchanted box to Ray, the advisor explained it possessed spatial magic, containing a spare change of clothes and storage for weapons. Ahead, commotion echoed down the stairs as escaping prisoners reached the lower levels, forcing the guards to urge the evacuating crowd to remain calm and keep moving forward. Amidst the tension, young Clona whimpered in fear, prompting her mother Chloe and the surrounding children to offer soft words of comfort. Leading the group deeper into the tunnel, the commander assured everyone they would reach the surface soon, only to stop dead in his tracks as a looming figure blocking the path came into view. Commander gasped in disbelief upon recognizing the prisoner wielding a cursed sword, wondering how an inmate could have possibly known about this confidential military passage. Tension spiked as dark magic radiated from the stranger's blade, casting a sinister pall over the halted line of evacuees. Stepping into the dim light behind the prisoner, Royal Guard Commander Gain appeared with an eerie chuckle, shocking both the commander and Ray. Gain sneered, proudly confessing that he was the traitor who had slain the guards and released the dangerous prisoners to orchestrate this exact trap. Declaring his actions were all for revenge, Gain lunged forward with terrifying speed, catching the defenders off guard as he initiated a sudden attack. Without warning, a violent blow struck from behind, crushing the guard's skull against the stone floor in a brutal collapse. As dust settled around the fallen guard, the young princess glanced over to her companion, breathlessly questioning if the threat had finally been subdued. Her companion's eyes widened in realization as he tracked the black cursed sword sliding harmlessly across the stone floor, noticing its sinister influence had severed. A desperate shout pierced the tunnel air, warning the Beast King to look behind him. Maniacal laughter echoed as the corrupted prisoner locked his clawed hand onto the warrior's face, catching the ruler completely off guard. His assailant slammed the monarch backward into the cavern wall with terrifying force. Seeing her father struck, Ferris screamed out in horror as yet more dark, cursed sword wielders poured into the corridor. High magic erupted across the chamber, yet the shadowy assailants absorbed the blow unfazed. Realizing a head-on clash would prove disastrous, Headmaster Shixal commanded Commander Gain to escort the evacuation group to safety while the frontline noble lords drew the enemy's fury. Urgent shouts echoed down the hallway, urging everyone toward the escape hatch, while the noble guardians stepped up to wall off the incoming swarm of corrupted prisoners. Striped Prisoner lunged forward with brutal speed, forcing the defenders into tight hand-to-hand combat to block the breach. Sparks and violent impacts rattled the narrow corridor as the children watched in panic, realizing the sheer numbers pressuring their defenders. Ordering the young ones to fall back, the Beast King and Lord Zeke took command of the bottleneck, drawing their steel to cut down the charging vanguard. Another fanatic sprinted through the smoke directly toward the retreat path, catching the young prince's eyes in a moment of sudden peril. Before the fanatic could reach them, King Raymond of Nanol thrust his hand forward, deploying a shimmering crest of defensive magic that instantly neutralized the threat. Lord Zeke offered a quick nod of gratitude to the neighboring monarch, who brushed off the praise while maintaining his watchful gaze on the battlefield. Scanning the chaotic rear guard as they fell back, Ray scanned the surrounding soldiers, suddenly realizing that Hendrix was nowhere to be seen among the retreating ranks. He suddenly sensed an aerial ambush as a shadowy figure dove through the billowing smoke above, landing directly before him with a spear in hand. Before he could fully process the unexpected arrival, the attacker lunged forward, forcing him to draw his weapon and block a vicious incoming blade. Locking weapons in a tense clash, the crazed attacker grinned darkly, taunting that they were meeting once again and addressing Revelt Runwalker by name. Blades clashed with violent fury as Revelt fought off a relentless assault. The maddened knight commander sneered, taunting the young noble for choosing to stay on the defensive instead of striking back. Channeling elemental magic, Hendrix enchanted his weapon with crackling thunder, unleashing a heavy downward strike. Revelt narrowly slipped past the lethal trajectory, mocking his opponent's missed blow with fluid agility. He leapt backward to create distance, closely observing the dark aura radiating from the commander. It was unmistakable that the cursed sword had granted Hendrix strength far surpassing his normal capabilities. Seeing the duel unfold, Lord Zeke stepped forward and urged the others to press on ahead, assuring them that his son and allies would handle the threat. Sovereign rulers exchanged solemn nods, agreeing that their primary obligation was to ensure the safety of the civilians caught in the crossfire. Addressing the younger ones and the attendants, Zeke instructed them all to fall back. Little Ferris and her companion watched anxiously, murmuring words of concern for Revelt as he held the line. He demanded to know why a commander who was sworn to protect the kingdom had turned into a traitor. Hendrix bitterly recalled the utter humiliation he suffered upon losing to a child, claiming his pride as a knight had been irreversibly ruined. Former knight declared that living without his pride was no different from death itself. Revelt could barely comprehend such petty vengeance, astonished that someone would resort to dark treason over a bruised ego. Screaming in unbridled rage, Hendrix lunged forward to demand atonement with Revelt's life. The boy prepared himself, standing firm as the corrupted blade came crashing down. Unleashing a lightning spear technique, the knight pressed his attack with savage intensity. Revelt parried the lightning-infused blows, but his opponent sinisterly chuckled as if setting up a trap. Suddenly, the madman shifted his footing and broke off the engagement, suddenly veering toward an unsuspecting bystander. Revelt gasped in horror as he realized Hendrix was aiming his lethal intent straight at young Ferris. The murderous grin, Hendrix plunged toward the terrified girl with his sword raised. Ferris froze in place, staring wide-eyed at the impending death coming from above. Before the blade could reach her, a towering figure charged into the path of the blow, placing his massive body between the killer and the child. Beast King Falcius bore the full brunt of the corrupted sword's impact to shield the young princess, grunting in pain as he took the strike head-on. Clashed fiercely alongside the young noble against their dark foe, but the corrupted knight effortlessly fended off their joint assault. Revelt bellowed in outrage at the traitor's arrogance, his teeth grit as the Beast King snarled beside him. Coldly dismissing their efforts, Hendrix declared that he harbored zero interest in fighting any of them. The single massive sweep of his sword, the corrupted commander sent all of his attackers flying backward. Revelt hit the ground hard, pushing himself up only to realize with horror what was about to happen. Stepping quietly out of the shadows behind Princess Ferris, Hendrix taunted the boy, asking if this young girl was someone precious to him. The onlookers gasped in horror as the Beast King cursed the villain, everyone frozen by the sudden threat to the young princess. Holding the sharp steel of his blade against Ferris's throat, Hendrix mockingly warned her not to move a muscle. Ferris trembled under the cold press of the blade, while Revelt stared in agonizing helplessness, unable to risk a rush. Desperate to draw the danger away from the innocent girl, Revelt pleaded, reminding the commander that his grudge was solely with him. Hendrix grinned sadistically, replying that executing someone dear right before his target's eyes sounded far more entertaining. Revelt screamed for him to stop and let her go. The Dark Knight casually agreed to the request. True to his word, Hendrix released Ferris by hurling her violently up into the air, leaving Revolt gasping in shock. Leaping after the airborne girl, the monster raised his blade with cruel intent, boasting that he would slice her cleanly in two. As the sword swung down toward the helpless princess, Revolt reached out his hand in ultimate desperation, unleashing every ounce of his magic to save her. Without warning, a lethal strike severed Ray's arm as he moved to shield Ferris, leaving the young princess staring in absolute horror. Driven back by the force of the assault, the young boy collapsed onto the ground near Ferris while the hooded assailant stood over them. Observing from a distance, Alexia gasped in horror upon realizing what had just happened to Ray's arm, while the attacker laughed maniacally. With ruthless efficiency, the attacker delivered another powerful blow that sent King Falcius crashing onto the stone floor. Refusing to give up, King Falcius spat out curses as he struggled against his opponent, determined not to let the enemy have his way. The attacker easily deflected the Beast King's retaliation, mockingly dismissing his efforts as nothing more than the useless struggles of filthy flies. Across the courtyard, Ferris cried out in anguish for Ray as he groaned in pain, bleeding heavily on the stone ground. Overwhelmed with guilt, Ferris fell to her knees, blaming herself for his injury, but Ray stoically reassured her that he was okay despite the severed limb. Offering a gentle smile despite the horrific wound, he offered words of comfort, expressing relief that the young princess remained unharmed. As Ray urged Ferris to tend to his bleeding quickly, the villain gloated over his suffering, promising to end his life immediately after taunting him. Suddenly, a tremendous impact shattered the battlefield as a powerful ally landed from above with incredible force. Through the clearing dust, an intense, unyielding gaze locked onto the adversary. Standing tall after her dramatic arrival, Headmaster Shixal commended the young boy for his bravery in holding the line. Carrying her massive weapon with effortless grace, the mighty sword saint offered a sincere apology for arriving late to the battle. Relief washed over the onlookers, with Princess Alexia calling out her name joyfully as the tide of battle finally turned. She stood as an immovable wall, her sudden arrival drawing a furious, dark glare from the masked attacker. Looking out across the fractured stone terrain, she noted calmly that there was no way she could overlook such a massive disturbance so near to the Royal Academy. Relief washed over young Ray and Ferris as they stared up at the formidable headmaster, realizing help had finally arrived. With a gentle smile, she instructed the children to leave the remaining fight to her, prompting the enraged enemy commander to order his men forward to kill her. A wave of cursed, puppet-like mercenaries lunged forward with drawn blades, while the headmaster casually rested her hand near her weapon's hilt. The attackers surged across the courtyard, their mindless fury driving them straight toward her stationary form. A brilliant flash of motion, she blurred through their ranks, striking down the mind-controlled thralls with lightning precision. Blade danced through the air in a display of peerless martial mastery, effortlessly dismantling every strike hurled against her. Surveying the fallen weapons scattered on the stone ground, she observed that severing the cursed swords rendered the thralls completely powerless. Turning to her allies, she entrusted the remaining immobilized foes to them, a duty they eagerly accepted with a respectful nod. Ray and Ferris watched in sheer awe as the kingdom's ultimate swordswoman showcased her overwhelming power, leaving the enemy leader gnashing his teeth in frustration. Stepping steadily toward the primary culprit, she raised her sword and announced that his turn had arrived. Confident smirk touched her lips as she issued a sharp challenge for him to step forward and face her. Rather than backing down, the hooded assassin chuckled darkly and reached into his cloak to unleash a hidden power. Violent blast of sinister energy exploded outward with a deafening roar, forcing everyone nearby to shield themselves from the devastating shockwave. He stood alongside the others on the rocky, ruined slope, staring at the sudden escape of their hooded assailant into the distance. High above, a massive vortex of energy swirled violently in the sky where the dark blast had erupted. Realizing the enemy had fled, the headmaster looked down in dismay as desperate cries rang out for the critically injured boy below. Horrified by the sight, the gathered noble students gasped in disbelief, calling out his name in sheer panic. Beside him, Ferris rushed to compress his severe, bleeding wounds, while little Clona looked on in horror panicking as blood continued to spill uncontrollably. Surrounding his fallen form, the group desperately assessed the situation, admitting that standard magic could not close such severe injuries and that a higher-tier healer was urgently needed. His voices echoed around him in alarm. His vision began to fade, his consciousness rapidly slipping away under the weight of his fatal trauma. Suddenly, Headmaster Shixal knelt beside him, conjuring a brilliant, glowing orb of magic and offering its mysterious power to save the dying boy.